Chapter 2848, Uproar at the entrance of the 6th Southern District. 10 minutes have gone by already. Looking at his quantum watch, Yi Kuei smiled in delight. Mr. Wang should be taking action right about now. Yi Kuei did not doubt Wang Xuanming's strength in the slightest. If not for the enforcement robots being too powerful, Yi Kuei would have wanted to spectate the fight at a close distance and see how terrified and helpless Shi Feng was against Wang Xianming. After all, a neutralizing grandmaster like Shi Feng would be utterly incapable of resisting Wang Xuanming's strength. The most he could do was run away. Once Shi Feng was taken care of, dealing with Ji Luorong would become a lot easier. Just as Yi Kuei was entertaining such thoughts, a loud noise suddenly came from the residential area. Has he started taking action? Yi Kuei grew excited when he heard the noise, and he couldn't help taking a few steps toward the residential area. Although he knew that the most he would see from his location was Shi Feng's building, this was more than enough. He was only curious to find out how many seconds Shi Feng would last against a monster like Wang Xianming. 3 seconds? Or perhaps 4 seconds? Based on the strength Shi Feng had displayed previously, Yi Kuei admitted that the younger man was indeed stronger than himself. However, if it came down to an all-out fight, he would have a great chance of victory. After all, Xinyuan grandmasters did not possess just incredible defensive capabilities but also recovery abilities far superior to the average person's. Yi Kuei might have suffered significant damage from Shi Feng's palm strike, but he had also recovered from the injury very quickly. One could say that the only advantages Shi Feng had over the average Xinyuan grandmaster were speed and destructive power. However, in front of Wang Xianming, these advantages would be negligible. Hence, Shi Feng would probably last against Wang Xianming roughly as long as an average Xinyuan grandmaster would. After leaving his hiding spot, Yi Kuei immediately noticed Wang Xianming charging into Shi Feng's house. Wang Xuanming's speed was so fast that Yi Kuei didn't even catch a clear sight of him. However, 2 seconds after Wang Xianming disappeared into the house, he actually reappeared at the entrance. He's done already. Yi Kuei was dumbfounded when he saw Wang Xianming back at the entrance of Shi Feng's house. He never thought that Wang Xianming would be so powerful as to end the fight in just 1 second. With such strength, calling Wang Xianming a monster wouldn't be an exaggeration at all. Wang Xianming was on a whole different level from Xinyuan grandmasters like himself. However, in the next moment, Yi Kuei was stunned once more. A woman wearing a light blue nightgown had actually appeared before the entrance without him realizing it. Meanwhile, as if agitated by this woman's appearance, Wang Xianming promptly launched a flurry of punches at her. Even from several hundred meters away, Yi Kuei could clearly sense the terrifying aura Wang Xianming exuded. Madness. Violence. Destruction. Nobody could possibly survive Wang Xuanming's chaotic punches. Has he lost his mind? Yi Kuei was horrified. If Wang Xianming had simply taught Shi Feng a lesson and landed the latter in the hospital for several months, the Green God Company wouldn't look too deeply into the matter. At most, it would strengthen the residential area's security and give Shi Feng some compensation. However, if Wang Xianming took a life in the upper zone, he would touch the Green God Company's bottom line. At that time, the company would definitely conduct a thorough investigation into the matter until it found the culprit. Once Wang Xianming was caught, even the big shots living in the middle layer wouldn't be able to help him. In fact, he might even drag down Lu Tiandi and Yi Kuei as accomplices. However, before Yi Kuei could recover from his shock, he received yet another jolt. This time, his eyes nearly fell out of their sockets. This was because the woman dressed in a nightgown actually remained unscathed despite facing Wang Xuanming's flurry of punches. She even moved closer and closer to Wang Xianming and eventually planted a palm on his chest. The instant the woman's blow landed, Wang Xianming actually stumbled 2 steps back and clutched his chest in pain. He also stared at the woman before him with fear in his eyes. Who is she? Why did such a monster appear in Shi Feng's house? Yi Kuei was shocked and confused as he looked at Aqua Rose, who stood in the corridor outside Shi Feng's house. He even rubbed his eyes to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. Wang Xianming, an incredibly powerful Xinyuan grandmaster, had actually lost to a frail woman. As Yi Kuei gaped in shock, Wang Xianming added to Yi Kuei's confusion by charging forward and attacking Aqua Rose once more. He actually showed no signs of trying to escape from another location. However, Yi Kuei quickly noticed that another woman of extraordinary beauty had walked out of the house. This woman was similarly dressed in a snow-white nightgown and had silky black hair flowing down to her waist. Under the illumination of moonlight, she looked just like a goddess that had descended to the mortal world. Although this woman did not exude an imposing aura, the indifference in her eyes combined with Wang Xuanming's strange behavior allowed Yi Kuei to guess what was going on. Most likely, the woman behind Wang Xianming was a monster as well. Hence, he did not choose to enter the house and break out from another location. After all, if Wang Xianming were to fight inside the more spacious house, he would have to face those two monstrous women simultaneously. No matter how powerful Wang Xianming was, he definitely wouldn't have any opportunity to escape under such circumstances. Hence, he could only choose to fight in the narrow hallway and risk a pincer attack. However, contrary to Wang Xuanming's expectations, Gentle Snow had no intention of double-teaming him. She simply stood aside and quietly looked at the broken door, appearing quite bothered about it. In other words, the broken door seemed much more important to Gentle Snow than Wang Xianming was. On the other side, Aqua Rose treated Wang Xuanming's series of desperate attacks as if they were child's play. Not only did she evade all of them effortlessly, but she also landed another palm strike on Wang Xianming, aggravating his injuries. Their clash continued for 4 seconds. At this point, Wang Xianming could no longer stand steadily, so weakened that even a Xinyuan grandmaster could go up against him. Trying to escape in such a condition was a luxury he couldn't afford. Before Wang Xianming could launch another round of attacks against Aqua Rose, the alerted enforcement robots finally arrived at the scene. After distinguishing everyone's identities, the enforcement robots promptly took Wang Xianming into custody. Once arrested by the enforcement robots, even a Xinyuan grandmaster would have no chance of putting up a struggle. As Yi Kuei watched Wang Xuanming's capture, he noticed Gentle Snow walking out of the house and looking in his direction. Fear seized Yi Kuei's mind, and goosebumps rose all over his body. He instinctively turned around and fled immediately. She shouldn't have seen me. I was so far away, and I even had my aura concealed. Even if she's a monster, she shouldn't have discovered me. Yi Kuei reassured himself this way as he fled. He repeatedly told himself that he was merely imagining things. Only after Yi Kuei had left Yuantian City's upper zone did he finally calm down from receiving Gentle Snow's attention. That was too damn scary. How can such a monster exist in this world? Chills crawled down Yi Kuei's back when he recalled Gentle Snow's indifferent gaze. I need to have the young master report this matter to the higher-ups immediately. Those monsters aren't things we can offend. Those two women simply aren't human. As Yi Kuei was fleeing Yuantian City's upper zone, Xia Qingying, the base layer's general manager, arrived at Shifeng's residential area together with several supervisors. Who's the fool who would actually dare assault someone in a residential area? Luo Hanbin frowned as he looked at the broken door before him. It had already been several years since a home assault had happened in Yuantian City's upper zone. The previous occasion had greatly angered the Green God Company. Although the victim had sustained only heavy injuries, not only had the offender gotten banished from the upper zone forever, but he was even imprisoned for 10 years once outside. Now that another occurrence had taken place, even if the Green God Company's executives didn't say anything, the managers of Yuantian City's upper zone definitely wouldn't spare the offender. However, when Luo Hanbin entered the house and saw Wang Xianming being held in place by two enforcement robots, his eyes nearly fell out of their sockets. Wang Xianming, a peerless genius of Haitian City's upper zone. Wang Xianming was a big shot who was only half a step away from becoming a mental strength master. Even a supervisor like Luo Hanbin had to act politely around him. Meanwhile, with Wang Xuanming's strength, he could rank within the top 3 of Haitian City's upper zone's base layer. The man even had a mental strength master as his teacher. With all these conditions, he was almost certain to become a permanent resident of the middle layer. Let alone Luo Hanbin, even Xia Qingying was shocked. Originally, she had expected the offender to be an ignorant punk. She never imagined that the offender would be a peerless genius of Haitian City's upper zone. She also couldn't help wondering how Shi Feng had apprehended Wang Xianming. With Wang Xuanming's skills, Xia Qingying had only a slight edge over him. She couldn't guarantee she would win if they clashed. And if Wang Xianming focused solely on escaping, even she wouldn't be able to hold him down for 7 or 8 seconds. Looking at Shi Feng sitting on the living room sofa, Xia Qingying blurted out, "You sure know how to surprise people. The last time, you broke the mental paths record. Now, you even brought down Haitian City's Wang Xianming." Smiling bitterly, Shi Feng said, "An accident. This really is an accident. I never thought that a big shot from Haitian City's upper zone would actually take action against me out of the blue." From the time Wang Xianming had broken into the house and until his apprehension, Shi Feng hadn't done anything. He had been a spectator all the while. He also never expected an expert like Wang Xianming to attack him. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Not wishing to reveal Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose's matters for the time being, he did not dispel Xia Qingying's misunderstanding. "Alright, then." Seeing that Shi Feng didn't intend to continue speaking, Xia Qingying said, "Now that Wang Xianming has been arrested, the Green God Company will definitely punish him. Even his teacher won't be able to do anything about it. However, his teacher is incredibly protective of his students. While he might not be able to do anything about Wang Xuanming's punishment, he is sure to pick a fight with you. Although we will strengthen the security of this area, you should still be careful. It's best if you don't leave the residential area for the time being." Even base layer general managers like herself would have a headache dealing with the anger of a mental strength master, let alone Shi Feng, who held only grade 1 authority. "Thank you for your warning, General Manager Xia," Shi Feng said, nodding. Shortly after Xia Qingying's group left with Wang Xianming, word of Wang Xuanming's assault on Shi Feng's house spread like wildfire. Even though it was already midnight, everyone in Yuantian City's upper zone still quickly received news of it. Chapter 2849, Hung Xinyuan's choice in one of Yuantian City's upper zone's mansion districts. "Uncle Hung, did something happen? Why did you suddenly call for me?" Muxin asked in confusion as she looked at Hung Xinyuan, who was standing by a French window and looking at the night view outside. She was just about to explore an ancient ruin. She had gathered her subordinates already. If she were lucky, she might discover a Tier 4 legacy land or a legacy guidance there. These things were incredibly important for the current Frost Heaven. The War of Worlds would be starting soon. Although her investigation had turned up very little information about the war, she had managed to deduce that they would face players of another world. At that time, the only options left for them would be to conquer or be conquered. It would be different from when players of other worlds entered the main continent. There would be no third option available to them. Hence, Frost Heaven needed to make as many preparations as possible before the War of Worlds began. Naturally, increasing the number of Tier 4 players the guild had was a top priority. Kurue, who stood beside Muxin, was also confused by Hung Xinyuan's summons. She had just fallen asleep, yet before she could get any rest, she was rudely roused out of bed. Hence, she was still incredibly sleepy and wanted nothing more than to crawl back into her bed right now. "Take a look for yourselves," Hung Xinyuan said as he passed a document to Muxin and Kurue. The document was none other than a summary of Wang Xinyuan's home assault in the 6th Southern District. How is this possible? Muxin couldn't help doubting her eyes when she read the report. She had heard of Haitian City's upper zone's Wang Xianming. An expert of his caliber could definitely rank as the number 1 or number 2 expert in the base layer of Yuantian City's upper zone. If such an expert decided to take covert action, even the Boulder Corporation would be powerless. All the corporation could do was have its members take shelter in its mansion temporarily. Nevertheless, Wang Xianming had not only failed in his attack on Shi Feng but even gotten apprehended. How could anyone possibly believe this? He was actually that powerful. After reading the report, Kurue was now wide awake. Simultaneously, a hint of confusion had appeared in her eyes. Everything is as the report states. Looking at Mushin's surprised expression, Xinyuan said, I have to admit that I indeed underestimated Shifeng. It seems that he has kept a lot more secrets than we thought. After pondering on the matter for a moment, Mushin asked, Uncle Hong, do you mean for us to deepen our relationship with Zero Wing? That's right. You already know what's coming in the future. When the war begins, even superpowers will have difficulty surviving. If we wish to survive, thoroughly solidifying our alliance with Zero Wing will undoubtedly be a good choice, Xinyuan said, nodding. I also plan to sell some of the corporation's phantom potions and life potions to Zero Wing. These should be what Zero Wing lacks the most right now. I understand. I'll contact Zero Wing immediately. Mushin nodded and promptly left the living room. Kurue snapped out of her daze. Looking at Xinyuan, she asked, Uncle Hong, do we need to go to such lengths? If Xinyuan were merely trying to form a strategic alliance with Zero Wing, then she could still accept such a decision. After all, the present strength and potential Zero Wing had displayed far exceeded those of the various superpowers. In fact, Zero Wing might even become an existence rivaling the 5 great super guilds. The only things the guild lacked now were time and talents. However, Xinyuan's decision to sell some of the Boulder Corporation's phantom potions and life potions to Zero Wing greatly confused her. These items served as the foundation for the various corporations. Even the successors of major corporations could get their hands on only a limited number of them. You don't understand. Wang Xianming isn't someone who can be defeated so easily. The cards and secrets Shifeng has hidden are absolutely extraordinary. Shaking his head, Xinyuan said, deepening our relationship with him now will be beneficial for both the corporation and you two sisters. In reality, apart from Shifeng's great potential, another reason behind Xinyuan's decision to go to such lengths to befriend Shifeng was an astonishing piece of information Xia Qingying had leaked to him. Shifeng wasn't the person who defeated Wang Xianming. Xinyuan knew that Wang Xuanming's combat power was only slightly beneath Xia Qingying's. Hence, defeating Wang Xianming was an incredibly challenging proposition. Needless to say, defeating him in just a few seconds would be even more difficult. Only the big shots living in the upper zone's middle layer could defeat Wang Xianming that fast. If the Boulder Corporation could befriend such big shots, it would bring much greater benefits to the corporation than simply silently developing its foundations on the base layer. At the same time, inside a mansion in the distant Haitian city's upper zone. Young master, what should we do? Ikue asked in a worried tone as he looked at Lu Tiendi, who had just exited his gaming cabin. Yuantian City's upper zone has already apprehended Mr. Wang. If your teacher blames you, Wang Xianming was a bona fide peerless genius. Finding a student like him was difficult, even for the middle layer's big shots. Now that Wang Xianming had been caught conducting a home assault, he would definitely be banished from the upper zone. Without the upper zone's various resources, any further improvements would be utterly impossible for him. After hearing Ikue's report, Lu Tiendi smiled and said, we don't need to do anything. Although the outcome is different from what I imagined, things are still progressing according to plan. Now, all we need to do is sit back and wait. Wang Xianming had always been their teacher's favorite pupil, receiving the best resources available. Hence, Lu Tiendi had always gotten shortchanged in terms of resources. If not for Lu Xinglua suffering a major failure, his teacher wouldn't have started placing importance on Lu Tiendi at all. Lu Tiendi's original plan had Wang Xianming and Shifeng forming a grudge against each other. In his opinion, with Shifeng's abilities and potential, Wang Xianming probably couldn't do anything significant to Shifeng. Once Wang Xianming failed in his attack, Shifeng would definitely retaliate and create a lot of problems for Wang Xianming. Naturally, Wang Xianming wouldn't sit still and would retaliate against Shifeng as well. Shifeng had exceeded Lu Tiendi's expectations and defeated Wang Xianming. However, this was not bad news for Lu Tiendi. In fact, this was the outcome he hoped to see the most. After all, not only would Wang Xianming get banished from the upper zone now, but Shi Feng would also earn the ire of their teacher. Once their teacher retaliated, Shi Feng would most likely be forced to leave the upper zone. In fact, he might even disappear from the world altogether. At that time, Lu Tiandi could plan on taking over Zero Wing. According to plan. Ikue shuddered involuntarily when he saw Lu Tiandi's indifferent smile. He never thought that Lu Tiandi would scheme against even Wang Xianming. Ignoring his butler's reaction, Lu Tiandi said, "All right, move along. I still need you to take care of Ji Luorong's group in God's domain." "Yes, sir." Ikue responded in a hurry. Although he had long since known that those who stood in Lu Tiandi's way would never have a good ending, he still got frightened when he saw one of Lu Tiandi's schemes coming to fruition. Meanwhile, after Wang Xuanming's assault, Yuantian City's upper zone arranged for Shi Feng's group to live in a better residential unit. Xia Qingying had an enforcement robot stationed near Shi Feng's new house long-term to prevent a similar situation from occurring. As icing on the cake, the Green God Company gifted 10 phantom potions and 10 life potions to Shi Feng as compensation. However, Shi Feng did not feel happy at all in this situation. On the contrary, he even felt slightly pressured. Now that Wang Xianming is in custody, his teacher definitely won't spare me. Even with an enforcement robot guarding the house 24/7, it'll probably be difficult to stop the retaliation of a mental strength master. As Shi Feng studied the information Xia Qingying supplied him, his head ached. Fu Jiuzhong, Wang Xuanming's teacher, was no ordinary individual. He was an expert that ranked at the top even in the middle layer and wielded incredible authority. He even had influence over several corporations operating in Yuantian City that rivaled the Boulder Corporation in scale. If Fu Jiuzhong began targeting Shi Feng would most likely have difficulty acquiring resources from Yuantian City's base layer. Although it is still a little early, it seems I have no choice but to take on the Divine Dragon's trial. Even now, Shi Feng still wasn't confident of completing Auerbach's trial. This was because a Tier 4 Divine Dragon was much stronger than an ordinary Tier 4 dragon. Even Tier 5 existences were unlikely to be a match for a Tier 4 Divine Dragon. Originally, Shi Feng had planned to challenge the trial only after further improving his mana body. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. However, it seemed that he had no choice but to push his plans forward. It was of utmost importance that he completed the Divine Dragon's trial now. This was because only by completing Auerbach's trial would he become the Divine Dragon's true companion. If that happened, Zero Wing could thoroughly solidify its position on the Western continent, and the Starlight Fortress could serve a much greater purpose. At that time, Zero Wing would be able to not only recruit talents from the Western continent in large numbers but also acquire large amounts of 7 Luminaries crystals. After all, a Heaven Mode regional dungeon produced an astonishing amount of 7 Luminaries crystals. With the 7 Luminaries crystals he acquired, he would then be able to exchange for a bunch of phantom potions and life potions. Only by securing phantom potions and life potions in bulk could he achieve a breakthrough in his mental strength in the real world and his concentration in God's domain. After returning to his room, Shi Feng promptly consumed a phantom potion and a life potion. He then lay in his fearless cabin and logged into the game. Chapter 2850, Divine Dragon's Trial. Zero Wing City, Zero Wing's residence. After Shi Feng came online, the first thing he did was assign tasks to Liang Jing and Yulan, particularly the distribution of the Tier 3 mana set equipment he had produced. He had made more than 200 of these sets, and he tasked Yulan with secretly gathering a batch of Tier 3 experts who could equip them. Once these experts were geared with the Tier 3 mana set equipment, Zero Wing would gain an additional trump card. Although the modified Tier 3 mana set equipment wasn't as powerful as the original version, there was only a 15% decrease in the basic attributes it provided. A Tier 3 player equipped with the modified set could still go up against mythic monsters of the same level. In addition, Shi Feng passed the Treasure of Fire to Melancholic Smile and had her procure as many mysterious flames as possible. They could offer the Seeds of Flame converted as an award for the candlelight trading firm's forgers and alchemists. By doing so, they could not only increase Candlelight's productivity but also attract more lifestyle players to join the firm. After all, a lifestyle player's promotion was largely influenced by their production success rates. When Melancholic Smile received the treasure of fire from Shifeng, she was shocked. Then, uncontrollable excitement welled up inside her. She had always had a passion for mysterious flames. However, incredibly powerful mysterious flames weren't easy to find. And even when the guild did find some, she didn't have the ability to make it her own. Thus, the mysterious flame she currently used was only a Tier 2 mysterious flame. No lifestyle player had managed to absorb either of the two Tier 3 mysterious flames sitting in the guild warehouse even now. However, the Purification Crown resolved the hurdle preventing lifestyle players from absorbing stronger mysterious flames and could even produce mysterious flames using various types of flames. Melancholic Smile could already envision the swarms of lifestyle players fighting to join the Candlelight trading firm. At that time, be it the construction of the Crimson Dragon flying ships or another mobile fortress, Candlelight wouldn't have to worry about lacking talents and manpower. At the same time, with Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose's return, Zero Wing no longer lacked Apex combatants to protect it. Hence, Shifeng tasked Fire Dance with secretly gathering information on the 7 treasures and collecting them directly, if possible. The 7 treasures were not only crucial for his quest, but their various supportive functions were simply heaven-defying, providing incredible help to both individuals and guilds. Previously, when players in God's domain were still low-leveled and weak, the likelihood of them encountering the 7 treasures was low. However, now that more and more Tier 4 players had begun appearing, the chances of players stumbling over the 7 treasures were much greater. Not to mention, the present Zero Wing was already far stronger than before. After its recent rapid development, Zero Wing now had more than 50,000 Tier 3 players under its command, a number that rivaled what the various superpowers had. In addition, the number of partners Zero Wing had continued to increase. Recently, Frostheaven had thoroughly solidified its alliance with Zero Wing, drastically increasing Zero Wing's influence on the eastern continent. At this point, Zero Wing could expand its territory already. Hence, his hunt for the 7 treasures was no longer an impossible task. Moreover, he had to get his hands on the 7 treasures to elevate Zero Wing's strength further. This was because only by gathering all of the 7 treasures could he fully utilize their power. In fact, the 7 treasures could even suppress the endless abyss. If Zero Wing could acquire this power, thoroughly making an enemy out of the 5 great super guilds wouldn't be a problem. It also wouldn't have to fear the invasion of other gods' domains. After Shifeng finished assigning tasks, he promptly teleported to the Starlight Fortress to take on the Divine Dragon's trial so that he could solidify Zero Wing's position on the western continent. At that time, even if the World Seal broke and the War of Worlds began, Zero Wing would have the ability to defend itself against the attacks of the foreign gods' domain's powers. Western Continent, Starlight Fortress, the summoning array at the top of the summoning tower lit up, and Shifeng appeared in the summoning hall a moment later. Standing atop the summoning tower, Shifeng had a full view of the Starlight Fortress's situation. At present, the Starlight Fortress was no longer the same as before. Not only had the number of players visiting the fortress increased massively, but even the weakest among them was at Tier 3. There were even quite a number of Tier 4 experts roaming the streets. After briefly scanning the fortress, Shifeng discovered at least 10 Tier 4 players, nearly outnumbering what Zero Wing City had. If not for the Divine Dragon's presence, even if the Starlight Fortress had Divine Tribe and Netherworld Empire's assistance, it would still be very difficult to keep all these players in check, not to mention the large number of visiting NPCs and NPC forces greedily eyeing the fortress. Yet, due to the Silver Divine Dragon, these players and NPCs had no choice but to lie low. After checking the fortress's situation, Shifeng went to the Summoning Tower's summoning altar, which was also the Silver Divine Dragon's resting place. When Shifeng arrived in the spacious summoning altar, what greeted him was the sight of a miniature version of the Silver Divine Dragon Auerbeck. The Divine Dragon, which was only around a dozen meters in length, was sleeping quietly in the middle of the room. At this time, Auerbeck had already reached level 164. The aura it released now was on a whole other level. It was also much stronger than the dragon Shifeng had slain in the ancient god's domain. In fact, Shifeng found it quite difficult to stand in the aura Auerbach exuded. If an ordinary Tier 4 player were in his place, they wouldn't even be able to approach the divine dragon. Looking at the fully recovered silver divine dragon, Shifeng gained further understanding of divine dragons. He had to admit that divine dragons truly weren't existences humans could offend. Despite Auerbach being only at the Tier 4 mythic rank, it was still strong enough to defeat ordinary Tier 5 existences. As for Tier 4 existences, they were nothing but ants in front of a Tier 4 divine dragon. Little human, you've come. Auerbach woke up upon sensing Shifeng's arrival. Looking at Shifeng with its golden eyes, it said in satisfaction, "It seems you have made your preparations to challenge the trial." "Yes, esteemed divine dragon," Shifeng agreed, nodding. Both his mana body and concentration standards had already reached a bottleneck, and it was unlikely he could make a breakthrough within a short time. If he wished to elevate his strength further, the only way to do so would be by obtaining a legendary weapon or equipment. However, this evidently wasn't a feasible plan, as every legendary weapon and equipment required a lot of time and manpower to acquire. "Good. Since you're confident in taking on the trial, I will let you challenge it as per our previous agreement. However, let me make this clear. You only have 3 opportunities. If you fail to pass the trial in 3 tries, the contract between us will be dissolved," Auerbach said as it rose from the ground. "As for the trial you will be undertaking, it is the trial that has been passed down through generations among the dragon race. Originally, this trial was created for dragons. However, since you wish to become my companion, you will have to complete the Tier 4 infant dragons trial at the very minimum." "A trial for Tier 4 infant dragons?" Shifeng was astonished by Auerbach's words. Although he had long since known that the divine dragon's trial wouldn't be simple, it would seem that he had still underestimated it. A Tier 4 infant dragon could fight even Tier 5 existences. Yet, he was supposed to face a trial created for Tier 4 infant dragons. "I will teleport you to the Dragon Temple. Remember, you will not be able to use external tools there. You must rely on your own strength to conquer the trial. If you die within the trial, you will be teleported back here automatically." After saying so, Auerbach began chanting an incantation in dragon tongue, generating divine runes around Shifeng one after another. 5 seconds later, Shifeng was cocooned in countless golden divine runes. He then transformed into a streak of light and disappeared from the summoning altar, leaving Auerbach by itself in the spacious room once more. After briefly getting dazzled by runes, Shifeng gradually recovered his sight and found that he stood before a majestic temple. The temple was tens of thousands of meters tall, and it looked like a huge mountain. Even a dragon would appear tiny in front of this temple, let alone a human. As soon as Shifeng walked up to the 1,000-meter-tall door before him, an ancient and deep voice suddenly rang out in his mind. "A human? No, you're not a human. How interesting. Auerbach actually sent you here to take the trial?" Along with this voice, the phantom of a gigantic dragon gradually faded into view before Shifeng. This dragon was well over 1,000 meters tall, and when it appeared, Shifeng immediately felt stifled. For a moment, he wondered if he was standing before a Tier 6 god. "It seems that little fellow has a really favorable opinion of you to actually let you take the trial," the dragon said as it looked at Shifeng. Smiling, it continued, "Very well. I will abide by the old contract since Auerbach has sent you here. You should prepare yourself. You might not be able to pass this trial, but if you do your best, you will still receive great benefits, so make sure to cherish this opportunity." After the dragon finished speaking, Shifeng found that the view in front of him had changed completely. Now, what was before him wasn't a massive temple but a broken bridge covered in grey mist. Meanwhile, he was currently standing on this broken bridge, and he could vaguely make out land in the distance. The instant the grey mist enveloped him, Shifeng was stupefied. Eternal energy. No. Read latest chapters at Wuxia EU to be precise, it's eternal energy condensed into a mist form. The moment the gray mist enveloped Shifeng, his mind felt refreshed like never before. Numerous ideas constantly emerged from the depths of his brain, and he could also view the operating principles of the mana surrounding him with unprecedented clarity. Before Shifeng could recover from his shock, the dragon's deep voice echoed in his mind once more. Repair the broken bridge using mana. So long as you repair 1/3 of the bridge, you will pass the trial. Your time limit is 3 days. However, for every 300 meters you progress, the time limit will get extended by an additional day. If you fail to repair 1/3 of the bridge when your time runs out, you will have failed the trial. When the dragon finished speaking, Shifeng heard rocks breaking off somewhere nearby. Turning toward the sound source, he found that the bridge's broken end was continuously crumbling. At this rate of collapse, let alone 3 days, the remaining portion of the broken bridge would disappear completely in just a few hours. And once the bridge disappeared, he would plunge into the endless darkness below. Chapter 2851, Mana Reconstruction. What an amazing bridge! When Shifeng spread his senses across the broken bridge, he was astounded. This was because this bridge was actually made entirely of mana that had solidified. Although this mana was solid, it was akin to sand. He could walk on this bridge without it collapsing like a sandcastle only because of special mana constructs holding the grains of sand together. After thinking up to this point, Shifeng promptly extended his mana domain to take control of these mana constructs and prevent the bridge from collapsing any further. However, the instant he did so, he was stunned. Manipulating solidified mana, is this taxing? Shifeng had plenty of experience manipulating mana that had condensed into a mist or liquid. In fact, he could control liquid mana as if it were his own arms. Yet, when he tried manipulating only a small bit of solid mana, he felt as if he was trying to move arms that had been injected with lead. Not only was the process incredibly strenuous, but even the slightest distraction meant immediately losing control of the mana. Meanwhile, the difficulty of maintaining the entire bridge's integrity was akin to holding up a weight of tens of tons. Not to mention, he also had to have this solid mana move according to his will to reconstruct the collapsed portion of the bridge. Looking at the continuously collapsing bridge, Shifeng finally understood just how difficult this trial was. Let alone reconstructing the bridge, just keeping the bridge from collapsing any further was already a monumental task. As Shifeng racked his brain over how to prevent the bridge from collapsing, the phantom of a gigantic dragon was quietly observing him in a distant cloud of mist. His grasp on mana is too immature. Let alone 3 days, he won't last even 3 hours at this rate. After taking a look at Shifeng's understanding and control over mana, the dragon shook its head and wings, disappearing silently from the mist. Time passed quickly. Now, less than half of the broken bridge, which was originally over 20 meters long, remained. Moreover, the bridge's rate of collapse was even accelerating as it grew shorter. This won't do. At this rate, the entire bridge will be gone in less than half an hour. I need to think of a way to stabilize a small portion of the bridge first. Shifeng had a headache as he looked at the collapsing bridge. He gave up on manipulating the entire bridge and chose to secure only a 2-meter length of the bridge. This was also the maximum amount of solid mana he could currently manipulate. Any more and the solid mana would challenge his control. Everything progressed just as Shifeng expected. In less than 20 minutes, the portion of the bridge he had given up on collapsed completely, and only the 2-meter stretch under his feet remained relatively stable. Even so, this small portion was still disintegrating gradually. How strange. Shifeng stared in confusion at the drastically slower collapse. The mana constructs that had been keeping the bridge together before clearly had their mana supply cut off and operations stopped after I arrived. However, the bridge's initial rate of collapse was much slower than when I started controlling it. The rate of collapse accelerated afterward. When he saw the broken bridge starting to collapse right after he appeared, he thought it signaled the start of his trial and represented his time limit. However, when he began manipulating the solid mana, he realized that he had been mistaken. The mana constructs keeping the bridge together had simply stopped operating, so the solid mana would naturally try to revert to its original form. Is there something wrong with my manipulation method? Feng couldn't help entertaining such a question. However, he promptly shook his head and denied this thought. No, I was simply manipulating the solid mana according to the original mana constructs. There shouldn't be a problem with my manipulation method. Otherwise, the entire bridge would have collapsed instantly instead of breaking apart bit by bit. A mana construct was similar to a magic array. If one did not use the appropriate method to manipulate a magic array, it would not activate. This was also the case for mana constructs, except mana constructs were much more fragile than magic arrays, crumbling if manipulated incorrectly. Due to his understanding of mana constructs, Feng had to wonder what exactly he had done wrong in preventing the bridge's collapse. Due to the eternal energy surrounding him, Feng's mind was operating with unprecedented clarity and activity. Numerous ideas came to mind, and he considered the issue from various perspectives. When less than 1 meter of the bridge remained, Feng's eyes suddenly widened in realization. I see. I've been doing things wrong from the very beginning. I shouldn't have tried to force the mana. Whether manipulating my own mana or the ambient mana, I should guide it down the desired path instead of compelling it to do so. While forcing mana does produce some results, mana has its own operating principles. Not only is forcing mana strenuous, but the bridge's mana will also conflict with my own mana. Upon thinking up to this point, Feng immediately began guiding his own mana into the mana constructs holding the broken bridge together. He no longer compelled it to enter the mana constructs. However, guiding mana was much more difficult than he had thought. This was because the mana in the environment was heterogeneous. Even his own mana was composed of various types of mana. Needless to say, trying to guide all these diverse types of mana to do the same thing was an impossible task. This meant that he had to refine and separate the different elements of mana in his body and have them do different things. Originally, accomplishing such a refinement would require a lot of time. After all, the disparate elements of mana in his body were all intermixed. Just separating them would already drive countless expert players to despair. To put this task into perspective, one could imagine a player's mana body as a box filled with millions of marbles of different colors, and these marbles represented mana of different elements. If players wanted to use a specific type of mana within their bodies, they would have to sort through all of these marbles and take out the ones they wanted to use. Doing so would be incredibly difficult and time-consuming. Not to mention, a mana body was much more complex than a box of marbles, which would further add to the difficulty. Fortunately for Feng, he had acquired a Saint's Legacy. Although the Ice World Saint's Legacy focused more on the ice element, the legacy had provided an introduction to the other elements. Thank goodness that Saint Legacy mentioned the various elements of mana. Otherwise, I likely wouldn't have any hope of completing the trial this time. Feng couldn't help smiling bitterly as he sensed the jumbled mana flowing within his body. Previously, when he made use of mana, he did not bother segregating it at all. He simply used it as it was and didn't find any problem with it. Now, however, he realized that his past actions had thoroughly mixed up the various types of mana in his body and made them even more difficult to separate. Separating the various types of mana in his body without knowing their basic properties would be akin to sorting a box of colorful marbles while colorblind. That would be mission impossible. Immediately, Feng began classifying his mana based on the Ice World Saint's introduction on the various elements. Fire-type mana was violent, scorching hot, and extremely difficult to control. Ice-type mana was quiet, cold, and hardly moved. Wind-type mana was free, refreshing, and spirited. Different elements of mana had their own habits and operating principles. If it were in the past, Feng would have found it impossible to distinguish them in detail. However, Feng was currently a half-step Grandmaster Magician. While distinguishing between the various types of mana remained difficult, it wasn't impossible. One trick he thought of to facilitate this process was constructing a single attributed elemental magic array for each of the various elements. This magic array would act as a filter and capture only the specific element of mana it was made to capture. The other elements would pass through the magic array unimpeded. This way, whenever he wished to call upon a particular element, he could immediately use the corresponding elemental magic array to gather the mana he needed. Originally, constructing these elemental magic arrays within one's mana body was a very delicate task. Even a half-step grandmaster magician like Shifeng would need 1 or 2 days to construct all of the necessary elemental magic arrays. However, thanks to the eternal energy surrounding him, Shifeng spent only 15 minutes constructing all the necessary magic arrays. Immediately, the various elements of mana in Shifeng's mana body gathered at specific locations, no longer one big heterogeneous mess. Amazing! So, this is the effect of segregating mana. When Shifeng scanned the mana in his body, he found that not only had its purity undergone a qualitative transformation, but his mana body also resonated far more powerfully with the environment. In fact, he also had a much easier time manipulating the magic array responsible for controlling his mana body. Now, he could even operate his mana body with a threefold manipulation method. So, this is why I couldn't cross the 110% threshold despite my concentration having reached the Tier 4 peak standard. Looking at the system notification that had appeared before him, Shifeng grew ecstatic. Just a moment ago, his mana body's completion rate had hit the legendary threshold. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. His mana body had reached a 120% completion rate. Meanwhile, the instant his mana body reached the 120% threshold, Shifeng sensed his physique improving significantly and his perception of his surroundings rising to a whole other level. Most importantly, his mana was not only much denser than before, but its quantity had also doubled. Now that I'm done segregating my mana, it's about time I started taking on the trial. Shifeng shifted his gaze toward the half-meter-long bridge underfoot. Chapter 2852, Breakthrough, Tier 5 Concentration. Even without Shifeng deliberately maintaining the bridge, the aura he radiated was now enough to slow the bridge's collapse drastically. A 120% completion rate mana body truly is amazing. No wonder people thought players could contend against a dragon of the same tier once a player's mana body reached 120% completion. Shifeng was astonished as he studied the stabilized bridge underfoot. Despite not making a conscious effort to control his mana body, he exerted a powerful stabilizing effect on his surroundings. With how powerful his current mana body was, he couldn't even begin to imagine how powerful his mana domain had become. Fighting a dragon of the same tier and level aside, he could now contend against a half-step demon king of the same level, at the very least. Afterward, Shifeng began injecting his segregated mana into the broken bridge. Once he did so, the broken bridge seemed renewed. The bridge's gradual collapse instantly halted, and its toughness had clearly risen to a whole new level as well. At this time, the bridge could probably receive Tier 4 attacks without sustaining any damage. Amazing! Sure enough, this is the true way to use mana. In the past, whenever he activated a skill or spell, he would make use of every type of mana available in his body to manipulate the ambient mana around him. Achieving a 10% efficiency by doing so would already be fortunate. This was because most skills and spells utilized only a specific element of mana to activate. To manipulate only a specific type of mana in the environment, using the corresponding element of mana to do so would yield the best results. Using other elements would still allow one to exert a certain degree of control, however, the efficiency would be incredibly poor. A backlash might even occur. Now that Shifeng had perfectly matched his mana with the ambient mana, he could use the ambient mana's power at 100% efficiency. One could easily imagine how much of a boost to his combat power this change would bring. After thoroughly stabilizing the broken bridge, Shifeng shifted his attention to the mana constructs keeping the bridge together. Keeping the bridge's mana constructs stable and operational could be considered the bottom line for this trial. If he wished to pass the trial, he would need to reconstruct the bridge. Otherwise, all he could do was stand still and stare idly at the distant land until his time ran out. This is. After carefully inspecting the bridge, Shifeng was surprised. Previously, he had focused entirely on stabilizing the bridge, so he hadn't spent much time observing the bridge itself. Now that his mana body had reached a 120% completion rate, his perception of his surroundings had improved to a point where it felt as if he had again taken over a half-step demon king's body. DI as expected of the dragon race's trial. This bridge's mana constructs are simply phenomenal. Shifeng sighed in awe as he observed the broken bridge's structure. This bridge has made use of practically every property and operating principle of the various elements of mana. Without a considerable understanding of these aspects, it would be impossible to create such mana constructs. In God's domain, it was already a heaven-defying task for players to gain a deep understanding of the operating principles of the various types of mana. Hence, making proper use of these types of mana was simply a luxury players couldn't afford. In fact, even the Ice World Saints Legacy provided a detailed introduction of only Ice-type mana and just briefly touched on the other elements. Needless to say, the Legacy didn't include instructions on how to use these other mana types. However, the bridge Shifeng stood on perfectly displayed the basic use of the various elements of mana. It was much better than a simple text introduction. Of course, it wouldn't be an easy task to see how exactly this bridge was constructed. This was because ordinary Tier 4 existences couldn't get a clear view of the operating principles of mana, let alone the operating principles of a mana construct. Only dragons with their high life ratings could possibly accomplish such a feat at Tier 4. Even so, this situation was definitely a massive opportunity for Tier 4 players. The biggest hurdle Tier 4 players needed to cross to reach Tier 5 was the construction of their personalized mana body. This process required players to have not only excellent control over mana but also a profound understanding of the operating principles and usage of mana and knowledge of the construction of mana bodies. Meanwhile, the broken bridge underneath Shifeng just so happened to address these problems. Suppressing the impatience in his heart, Shifeng immediately began reconstructing the broken bridge with his own mana. Following this, time passed quickly. Although reconstructing the bridge was incredibly challenging, due to the eternal energy surrounding him, Shifeng found that the incomparably complex mana constructs weren't impossible to understand. Despite encountering failure one after another, Shifeng did not grow disappointed but even became increasingly excited instead. This was because he was making progress with each failure. As he continuously adjusted his utilization of the various mana types, his control over them also improved in precision and efficiency. After experimenting for 2 days straight, Shifeng finally constructed a half-meter-long bridge. I did it! I finally did it! An indescribable sense of joy and excitement welled up in Shifeng's heart as he looked at the portion of the bridge he had reconstructed. Although the bridge he reconstructed looked much cruder than the original bridge, it did not send him plunging into the abyss below when he tried to stand on it. Most importantly, he had finally gained a basic understanding of the various mana constructs. This meant that he had finally reached a qualified level when it came to utilizing the various elements of mana. With these achievements, he was confident he could begin constructing his Tier 5 mana body. Of course, Shifeng did not let his achievements blind him. He still gave the trial's completion top priority. After all, having a divine dragon as a companion was much more important than constructing his personalized mana body. Immediately afterward, he resumed reconstructing the broken bridge and advanced toward the distant land. Although Shifeng had spent 2 days reconstructing his first half-meter-long segment, now that he had a foundation, he could reconstruct the subsequent segments much more quickly. Moreover, he also improved his precision with every segment he reconstructed, which, in turn, made his reconstructions look increasingly refined. After working for nearly a day, Shifeng finally reached the 500-meter mark, his achievement extending his time limit by 1 day. The distance from the starting point to the distant land is roughly 20 kilometers. So, I'll need to extend the bridge by 7 kilometers or so to pass the trial. If I can complete 500 meters per day, I should finish this trial within half a month. After Shifeng made some rough mental calculations, anticipation filled him. Although he would be spending much more time in this trial than he initially expected, the harvest he would gain was very much worth the time spent. After resting for a moment, Shifeng promptly resumed his job as a construction worker. Meanwhile, after another 8 days had gone by while Shifeng was reconstructing the broken bridge, a loud tearing sound suddenly appeared in a secret land in the eastern continent. A spatial channel several kilometers tall and 20 kilometers wide was sealed in this secret land. The moment the loud tearing noise sounded, the divine runes sealing this spatial channel shattered and faded out of existence. It is still starting in the end? An illusory figure appeared before the spatial channel. After looking at the spatial channel with a complicated gaze, this figure then disappeared without a trace. At the same time as this illusory figure disappeared, nearly 20 figures emerged from this gigantic spatial channel. Every one of these figures exuded powerful and ancient auras highly incompatible with the surrounding space. Ha ha ha. It's finally open. Our guild was even the first to discover it. So, this is an alternate god's domain? Why is the ambient mana here so thin? Although the mana density is somewhat low here, it is still another god's domain. Hurry up and notify the guild leader and the others. Tell them that the seal has been lifted and that the world passage is open. Have them make the necessary preparations. I'll go ahead with a team to understand the situation of this god's domain. We must claim this world for ourselves ahead of the other guilds, said the middle-aged man standing at the head of the team. At the middle-aged man's words, the team immediately split into two groups. 3 players returned to the world passage, while the remaining 15 players charged straight toward the secret land's exit. As these foreign invaders were taking action, Shifeng was struggling inside the distant special space. I didn't think that reconstructing the bridge would place such a huge burden on the brain. It's already been 8 days, yet I haven't even reached the 3,400-meter mark. I've also exhausted more than half of my concentration already. Shifeng smiled bitterly as he looked at the distant land. Read latest chapters at Wuxia EU. At this time, he more or less understood why the giant dragon had such low hopes for him. Originally, he thought that he could progress 500 meters a day. However, the more time he spent in the trial, the greater the mental pressure he suffered from reconstructing the bridge. Whenever he tried manipulating the bridge's mana constructs, he felt like needles were pricking his mind. Moreover, the degree of pain intensified as he progressed, making the bridge's reconstruction increasingly difficult. Now, he couldn't even manage 300 meters in a day. Despite this situation, Shifeng had no intention of giving up. After all, every moment he spent in this special space allowed him to improve his control over the various elements of mana. If possible, he even wished he could spend several months in this special space. However, this obviously wasn't allowed, as proven by the increasingly powerful mental pressure he suffered. This feature was most likely implemented to deal with anyone trying to exploit this special space's benefits. Shifeng continued pushing forward for the next 3 days. By the end of the 3rd day, Shifeng would suffer intense pain even if he only slightly manipulated his mana. After the 4th day, Shifeng's complexion had not only become deathly pale, but even his consciousness was beginning to blur. Meanwhile, as his consciousness grew increasingly hazy, he gradually understood that his time in the trial was coming to an end. This wasn't just because he was running out of time but also because he would thoroughly exhaust his concentration and collapse after a few more attempts. The next moment, after Shifeng completed another 1-meter-long segment and was about to lose consciousness, the system's crisp and indifferent voice suddenly entered his ears. System, congratulations. Your concentration has reached the Tier 5 standard. It is also detected that your mana body has reached the 120% completion rate. You have one opportunity to receive a world blessing and reconstruct your sea of consciousness. Do you wish to activate the world blessing now? Opportunity will be rejected by default if you do not respond in 3 minutes. Chapter 2853, Upgraded Soul Reconstruct My Sea of Consciousness. Shifeng was shocked and confused as he looked at the system notification. The concept of reconstructing one's sea of consciousness wasn't foreign to him. In fact, he knew plenty about it. However, it was precisely because of this that he found this situation unbelievable. The sea of consciousness, to put it simply, referred to a player's soul. It was also something related to the promotion of Tier 5 players to Tier 6. The qualitative transformation of the soul. Any player who wished to get promoted to Tier 6 needed to have not only a powerful body but also a powerful soul. Only when both requirements were met could players get promoted to Tier 6. Of the two conditions, the requirement of a sufficiently powerful soul was more difficult to fulfill. This was because the soul was an illusory object. The only thing players could do to upgrade their soul was continuously raise their concentration standard. By doing so, their soul would automatically grow stronger over time. However, this form of improvement was incredibly slow. Even if a player's concentration reached the Tier 5 peak standard, their soul wouldn't develop that fast. If one wished to let one's soul undergo a qualitative transformation, one would need to experience numerous events that tempered the mind. Of course, there was an even quicker method to do so, raising one's concentration to the Tier 6 God rank standard. This was an incredibly frightening concentration standard where players could continuously modify and improve their sea of consciousness through their own will. The benefits a Tier 6 concentration provided were far superior to those of a Tier 5 concentration. In addition, there was also a third method, relying on external items to destroy one's inherent sea of consciousness and construct a new one. This method was similar to how players with Tier 6 concentration modified their sea of consciousness, only much more ruthless and thorough. Reconstructing a sea of consciousness meant destroying everything that currently existed and creating a completely new one. It was different from what players with Tier 6 concentration did. These players would gradually address the flaws of their existing sea of consciousness, refining it over time. For Tier 5 players, the opportunity to reconstruct their sea of consciousness was both rare and precious. Shifeng never even dreamed of receiving such an opportunity before getting promoted to tier. After pondering in silence for a moment, he chose to accept the world blessing and the opportunity to reconstruct his sea of consciousness. System: the world blessing will be granted in 30 seconds. Please make the necessary preparations. The higher your completion rate, the better the reconstructed sea of consciousness will be. The higher the completion rate, the better. Not daring to be careless, Shifeng took a deep breath, stopped work on the bridge, and focused only a portion of his consciousness on stabilizing it to prevent it from collapsing. He planned to give the reconstruction process his all. 30 seconds went by in the blink of an eye. Shifeng felt an unprecedented pain assault him, as if his soul was getting ripped out of his body. Had he not absorbed the Tier 4 hellfire before, he wouldn't have been able to endure this pain at all. However, after 10 seconds of this soul-wrenching pain, it disappeared all of a sudden. Simultaneously, Shifeng felt his mind go completely blank. As for his soul, what remained of it were only countless soul fragments. Immediately afterward, numerous magic arrays appeared before him. These magic arrays were so complex that despite being a half-step Grandmaster Magician himself, he was still shocked. He spotted over a dozen Grandmaster magic arrays. As for Master magic arrays, they easily numbered over 100. Meanwhile, all of these magic arrays joined together to form an incomparably large soul array. System: you have 4 hours to reconstruct your sea of consciousness. Once 4 hours have passed, the world blessing will disappear. If you do not achieve at least a 40% completion rate by the end of these 4 hours, your sea of consciousness will not be reconstructed. Afterward, as a consequence of having your soul shattered, you will enter a weakened soul state for 20 natural days. 20 days? Shifeng wasn't particularly surprised by the penalty for failure. Opportunities and risks came hand in hand in God's domain. In fact, a 20-day penalty could even be considered very light. If a Tier 5 expert were to find out that this opportunity came with such low risks, they would do everything they could to secure it. Subsequently, Shifeng stopped thinking about other things and focused on copying the soul array into his sea of consciousness. He couldn't decide whether he was fortunate or unfortunate. The fortunate part of this situation was that he had accepted the world blessing while in this special space full of eternal energy. He would have a much easier time drawing the soul array in this environment. The unfortunate part was that, along with the destruction of his soul, he had lost the ability to stabilize the broken bridge. In other words, he didn't have 4 hours to complete the soul array at all. Despite his frustrations, Shifeng did not give up on this opportunity. Moreover, due to the eternal energy's effects, he managed to familiarize himself with the master magic arrays and replicate them with ease. The soul array's completion rate rose at a rate visible to the naked eye. 1%. 3%. 7%. In just 1 hour, Shifeng had already completed 16% of the gigantic soul array. At this rate, he could definitely reach the required 40% within 4 hours. Even if copying the Grandmaster magic arrays later would slow down his progress, reaching 40% shouldn't be difficult. Another 1.5 hours went by, during which the soul array's completion rate had reached 35%. Shifeng found his progress unbelievable. Hence, he attempted to copy his first Grandmaster magic array. The instant he completed the magic array, his progress rose from 35% to 38%. It increased by this much. Shifeng looked at his progress bar in surprise. Completing a master magic array didn't even increase his progress by 0.5%. Now, completing just one Grandmaster magic array had raised his progress by 3%. Meanwhile, under the Eternal Energy's effects, his speed in copying the Grandmaster magic array wasn't much slower than when he worked on the Master magic arrays. Without my support, the bridge can last 3 hours at most. I only have about 20 minutes left now, so I can only attempt one more Grandmaster magic array. Although Shifeng guessed that the broken bridge would remain stable for 3 hours without his support, that was only an estimate. As a precaution, he decided to conclude his attempt after copying one more Grandmaster magic array. The soul array was massive. However, the crucial parts of the soul array were still the dozen or so Grandmaster magic arrays, particularly the 6 serving as the soul array's core. Originally, Shifeng had thought to complete more master magic arrays to allow the core magic arrays to exhibit greater functionality. Unfortunately, he clearly did not have time for that. Now, he could only grit his teeth and draw the second core magic array. Time passed quickly. 10 minutes later, Shifeng finished drawing the second core magic array. The soul array's completion rate jumped from 38% to 41%, reaching the system's requirement. Upon seeing this, Shifeng chose to complete the reconstruction. System, magic array completion rate at 41%. You have met the basic requirement for reconstruction. Your sea of consciousness will be reconstructed according to the constructed magic array. Do you wish to begin the reconstruction? Reconstruct. Shifeng promptly chose to go through with the reconstruction. Although he had more than an hour remaining before the world blessing disappeared, if he died midway, his reconstruction attempt would become forfeit as well. The next moment, after he approved the reconstruction, the soul array drawn in his sea of consciousness began operating. Although the soul array was still incomplete, just like the system stated, it was functional. As his sea of consciousness's reconstruction began, Shifeng experienced an unprecedented mental clarity. His mind became much more active, and his reaction speed also improved significantly. After 20 seconds into the reconstruction, he discovered that his previously blurry sea of consciousness had become much more tangible. The change was akin to mist condensing into water. The change might not seem significant, but the density of his sea of consciousness had undergone a qualitative transformation. Although his sea of consciousness was still in an illusory state, Shifeng could tell that his thinking speed had more than tripled. So long as he focused his mind, he could observe the world around him in a decelerated state. Amazing! Shifeng was astonished as he inspected his newly reconstructed sea of consciousness. No wonder so many Tier 5 experts in the past had been so crazy about reconstructing their sea of consciousness. With my current sea of consciousness, even though my concentration is only at the Tier 5 basic standard, the rate of my soul's improvement is probably faster than someone with Tier 5 peak concentration. His concentration remained at the Tier 5 basic standard. However, his soul's strengthening rate was superior to even that of experts with Tier 5 peak concentration. The next moment, when Shifeng opened his eyes again, his surroundings looked completely different from before. The range of his mental perception had increased from 100 yards to 500 yards, and his 5 senses had also undergone a qualitative transformation. Similarly, his body felt more flexible and sharper than ever before. At this time, even though he wasn't actively manipulating his mana, the 2-meter-long bridge under him actually remained nearly stable. Moreover, his concentration was no longer depleted. Instead, It was brimming like never before. It seems I shouldn't have any problems completing the trial now. Shifeng smiled subconsciously as he looked at the relatively stable bridge. Previously, he had to make an effort to ensure that the bridge did not collapse. Doing so had taken up a lot of his focus. Now, he no longer needed to split his attention between the reconstruction and maintaining the bridge's integrity. He only needed to concentrate on reconstructing the broken bridge. This would reduce his mental stress by a large margin. Following this, Shifeng resumed reconstructing the bridge. He had a much easier time than before, which allowed him to progress at a flying pace. After just 3 more days, his progress finally reached the 1/3 mark of the entire bridge. However, Shifeng had no intention of stopping here. After all, the eternal energy in this place was simply wonderful. By staying here, he could not only further his understanding of the various mana types but also familiarize himself with his new sea of consciousness and verify the theories he thought up for his new mana body. Hence, he did not rush to exit the trial, continuing to advance and reconstruct the broken bridge. As Shifeng got closer to the distant land, he found that he also had to improve the quality of the supports he constructed. Otherwise, the bridge wouldn't be able to withstand the corrosion of the abyss below. Read latest chapters at Wuxia EU. After working for another 4 days and arriving at the halfway mark, he could no longer advance any further. However, his failure to progress wasn't because he had exhausted his concentration but because the supports he constructed could no longer withstand the abyss's corrosion. Short of a qualitative transformation, they wouldn't be able to hold up the bridge at all. It seems this is as far as I can go. Shifeng couldn't help feeling a little disappointed as he looked at the distant land. At this time, it looked much clearer than before. From what he could sense, he should be able to receive massive benefits in that land. However, with his current standards, it was evidently impossible to construct a bridge of a much higher quality. Shifeng immediately chose to leave this special space. Chapter 2854, Upgrading the Abyssal Blade inside the Ancient Dragon Temple. How surprising, the Dragon Phantom exclaimed in astonishment when Shifeng suddenly appeared before it. Despite having the body of a human, you actually managed to clear a trial made for the dragon race. Moreover, you managed to reach the halfway point. This is a rare achievement, even among the dragon race. A rare achievement? Shifeng was surprised by the dragon's words. The dragon race was an apex race. The perception of dragons was definitely far superior to his own. Not to mention, there were even divine dragons among the dragon race. For divine dragons, let alone reaching the halfway point, even completing the entire bridge and reaching the distant land shouldn't be strange. After all, the life rating they possessed far exceeded that of humans. That's right. This is a rare achievement, the Dragon Phantom said, nodding. In the dragon race's long history, only 5 have managed to reach the halfway point while still at Tier 4. Every one of them is a genius of the dragon race with an excellent bloodline. Hence, I find it truly incredible that you accomplished the same feat with just the body of a human. Shifeng was surprised once more. He never thought that even among the dragon race, only 5 dragons had reached the halfway point while still at Tier 4. Reaching the halfway point was indeed a challenging task. Not only would one need to have a sufficiently powerful soul, but one would also need to utilize the various elements of mana to their very limits. However, having a powerful soul was a given for dragons. As for utilizing the various elements' basic properties, this was also as easy as drinking water for dragons. Otherwise, there was no way dragons could be so powerful. Normally, dragons that can reach the halfway point are already adults. I can now see why Auerbach decided to let you undertake the trial, the Dragon Phantom said, its eyes filled with praise as it looked at Shifeng. Now, according to the ancient contract, you may take one of the 3 treasure chests stored within the treasury. As soon as the Dragon Phantom finished speaking, 3 massive treasure chests appeared before Shifeng. The instant these treasure chests appeared, the mana within the Dragon Temple immediately thickened. In fact, a faint hint of divine might now wafted into the temple. As expected of the dragon race's reward. I doubt I can get such loot even from killing a tier 6 god. Shi Feng was filled with an indescribable sense of shock as he inspected the 3 treasure chests before him. The trial rewards this time were simply mind-blowing. If taken to the outside world, any one of these 3 treasure chests could drive the entire god's domain wild. The first chest, named the Blackstone Treasure Chest, gave players 1 fragmented legendary weapon and 2 pieces of fragmented legendary equipment that suited them. The second chest, named the Red Crystal Treasure Chest, contained 4 items, either Tier 5 skill books or Tier 5 legacy guidances suitable for the player. The third chest, named the Purple Jade Treasure Chest, rewarded players with 10 to 12 god crystals. The Blackstone Treasure Chest aside, both the Red Crystal Treasure Chest and Purple Jade Treasure Chest provided things Shi Feng greatly desired. At this time, he only needed to create a personalized mana body to get promoted to Tier 5. Hence, Tier 5 skill books were of great importance to him. If he relied only on legacy skill points, he would be able to acquire only 2 Tier 5 skills at best. God crystals were equally important to him. This was because god crystals were needed to upgrade many of the weapons and equipment he possessed, and upgrading these items would provide a tremendous boost to his combat power. Pick 1. The dragon phantom smiled faintly when it saw the gleam in Shi Feng's eyes. I will teleport you back in 3 minutes, so you'd best not take too long in choosing. After giving the matter some thought, Shi Feng said earnestly, I've decided. I will go with the Purple Jade Treasure Chest. While the Red Crystal Treasure Chest was indeed important to him, he was, after all, still at Tier 4 right now. Moreover, the items appearing inside the Red Crystal Treasure Chest were completely random. If he were unfortunate, he might end up getting 4 Tier 5 legacy guidances. Moreover, god crystals weren't easy to come by. If he missed this opportunity, who knew how long he would have to wait before he received another opportunity to improve his weapons and equipment further. Alright, this Purple Jade Treasure Chest is yours, the Dragon Phantom said, lifting a claw. Immediately, the barrier sealing the Purple Jade Treasure Chest disappeared. Shi Feng chose to open the treasure chest without hesitation. After all, there was no way he could bring such a massive treasure chest away. The instant the treasure chest opened, divine might gushed out of it. Bathed in this divine might, even ordinary Tier 4 players would grow fearful and dare not approach the treasure chest. However, now that Shi Feng's concentration had reached the Tier 5 standard, resisting this divine might wasn't much of a problem. In fact, he was confident he could stand tall in the presence of even a bona fide Tier 6 god in his present state. 11. Shi Feng couldn't help feeling a little disappointed when he saw the number of god crystals in the treasure chest. If not for the luck attribute having no effect on high-caliber treasure chests, he definitely would have activated Divine Providence to boost his luck. After all, the value of 1 god crystal nearly rivaled that of fragmented legendary items. Moreover, god crystals were just as rare as fragmented legendary items. Although that's 1 less god crystal than I hoped for, I have more than enough to upgrade my weapon now. The next moment, Shi Feng had the Abyssal Blade absorb 4 god crystals without hesitation. Now that he was at the half-step Tier 5 standard, only the Light of 2 Worlds was an adequate weapon for him. The Abyssal Blade couldn't keep up with him any longer. Hence, he had to upgrade it. After the Abyssal Blade absorbed the 4 god crystals, its skills got upgraded to Tier 4, and its basic attributes underwent some changes. Abyssal Blade, one-handed sword, magic weapon, fragmented legendary rank, equipment requirement, strength 3000, agility 2000 attack power, 235% of strength attribute, attack speed, 3% of agility attribute, all attributes, increases according to user's level, ignore levels plus 35 attacks have 70% chance to cause 250% damage, 40% chance to cause 300% damage, every attack increases attack speed by 2% to a maximum of 30%. When equipped, strength increased by 50%, agility increased by 50%, intelligence increased by 35%, endurance increased by 50%, attack speed increased by 40%, all effects of weapon-related skills increased by 20%, all item level requirements reduced by 10 levels. If wielder belongs to a swordsman-related class, all skill levels +6. Increase free ability points received for every increase in level by 2 points. Equipment Tier 4. Can be evolved, devour 9 god crystals to evolve to Tier 5. Additional active skill 1, Darkness Bind, Tier 4. Binds all enemies within a 500-yard radius for 4 seconds and reduces their defense and magic resistance by 100% for 20 seconds. Cooldown, 40 seconds. Additional active skill 2, Darkness Domain, Tier 4. Converts an area of 800 yards around the user into a darkness domain. Weakens the senses of all enemies within the darkness domain and reduces enemies' basic attributes by 20%. While inside the darkness domain, the user may control up to 36 strands of power of darkness. Each strand carries a force equivalent to 150% of the user's strength and causes 200% darkness damage. Duration, 60 seconds. Cooldown, 10 minutes. Additional passive Profound Inheritance, Mana Abyss, Tier 4. The higher the density of the mana surrounding the abyssal blade, the more power the weapon will exhibit. The power of the weapon can be increased up to 150%. Additional active Profound Inheritance, Black Dragon's Soul, Tier 4. Grants the user the Black Dragon King's soul and transforms the user into the Black Dragon King. The higher the density of the surrounding mana, the higher the Black Dragon King's life rating will be. Can use the skill, Dragon Breath. Duration, 10 minutes. Cooldown, 15 hours. A sword recast from the fragments of an ancient, unknown weapon. The Black Dragon King's power has been sealed within the sword, although the Black Dragon King has cursed the weapon. Beyond the immense strength the blade offers, the wielder must face a backlash after a certain amount of time. If the wielder cannot suppress the backlash, the wielder will receive the Black Dragon King's curse, permanently reducing all attributes by 70%. Unable to be dropped. Unable to be traded. Unable to be destroyed. After the abyssal blade absorbed the 4 god crystals, its attributes and skills received significant improvements. Although the magic weapon was still no match for the Light of Two Worlds in terms of attack power and attack speed, it was still top tier among fragmented legendary weapons. Shifeng felt very satisfied after upgrading his weapon. Now that he had the Tier 4 Abyssal Blade, combined with his half-step Tier 5 standard, he was confident he could hold his own even against a real Tier 4 dragon. After all, once he transformed himself into a Tier 4 dragon, his combat standards and mastery over the elements would become much superior to the average Tier 4 dragons. Read latest chapters at Wuxia EU. Although Shifeng also had the option of repairing the disintegration armor instead of upgrading the abyssal blade, he had decided against it. The disintegration armor was legendary set equipment. If he couldn't gather the complete set, the equipment requirement of an individual piece would be higher than normal. This would make it impossible for him to equip the disintegration armor. After all, legendary weapons and equipment were crafted for Tier 6 gods. Aside from a few unique legendary weapons and equipment, most would need players to reach Tier 5 at minimum to equip them. If he repaired the disintegration armor and ended up unable to equip it, he would definitely die of regret. Hence, he decided to upgrade the abyssal blade instead, to play safe. As for the disintegration armor, it wouldn't be too late to find more god crystals to repair it once he had reached Tier 5. It's time to leave, the dragon phantom said, snapping Shifeng out of his reverie. It then raised a claw at Shifeng. Immediately, divine runes appeared around Shifeng one after another, enveloping him completely. His body then transformed into a streak of light and disappeared from the dragon temple. When the divine runes surrounding Shifeng disappeared, he found that he was back in the summoning tower's summoning altar. Chapter 2855, Global Transformation. Inside the summoning altar, as the divine runes enveloping Shifeng disappeared, Auerbach snapped his eyes open and stared at him in surprise. You succeeded. Actually, Auerbach could tell that Shifeng had completed the trial the moment he laid eyes on the human. This was because Shifeng looked completely different in his eyes right now. Although there was no change to Shifeng's level, the mana he radiated was completely different from before he challenged the trial. Not only did Shifeng's mana blend much better with the ambient mana, but the quality of his mana had also undergone a qualitative transformation. The fact that Shifeng had such exquisite control over his own mana proved that he had conquered the trial. However, Auerbach still found this situation unbelievable. Shifeng would already be plenty amazing if he managed to complete the trial on his third attempt. Yet, now, Shifeng had actually completed the trial on his first attempt. I got lucky. Shifeng nodded. If his concentration hadn't broken through to the Tier 5 standard at the very last minute, which allowed him to receive the world blessing to reconstruct his sea of consciousness, completing the trial would have been a pipe dream. No. It is impossible for someone to pass the trial by relying on luck. It is all because of your own strength, Auerbach said, shaking his head. Since you've passed the trial, according to our contract, I, Auerbach, acknowledge you as my contractor from now on. As soon as Auerbach finished speaking, Shifeng felt a scorching sensation on his left arm. Before Shifeng realized it, the symbol of a silver dragon had been branded on his left arm. Simultaneously, the system's emotionless voice rang out in his mind. System, congratulations. You have completed the second phase of the epic quest, Void Cage, and received the Silver Divine Dragon Auerbach's acknowledgement. You have become a true dragon's contractor. You now have the ability to call upon the Silver Divine Dragon to fight for you at any time. Rewarding 30 legacy skill points and 1 level. Shifeng's level immediately rose from level 150 to level 151. His legacy skill points also increased by 30. If you encounter any troubles in the future, call upon me, Auerbach said. With the contractor's mark, I can teleport to your location at any time. However, you should still be cautious. The contractor's mark has limited power. I cannot sense its location in certain areas. Moreover, the current god's domain is no longer the same. Although you have made significant growth, if you behave too aggressively outside, you might still fall into a desperate situation. You might even have your soul annihilated. Different? Has the world passage opened already? Auerbach's words startled Shifeng. Auerbach could defeat even ordinary Tier 5 individuals. Since he was issuing such a dire warning, the current god's domain must have undergone drastic changes. That's right. The world passage is completely open now. Existences of another world have invaded this world. In fact, some of God's domain's rules have already changed. You will understand what I mean if you go out and take a look, Auerbach said, nodding. He then pointed at the door that was sealed by a magic array and continued, if you encounter trouble, it is best if you summon me immediately. Thank you for your warning, Your Excellency. I will be careful. Shifeng nodded and mentally noted to himself to be more careful. Afterward, he departed from the summoning altar. As for Auerbach, the Silver Divine Dragon resumed its slumber in the summoning altar. The moment Shifeng exited the summoning tower, he was stunned. What dense mana! The density of the Starlight Fortress's ambient mana had more than doubled compared to before he went to the Dragon Temple. Apart from Zero Wing City, probably no other guild city in God's domain possessed such dense mana. Even Stone Forest City couldn't compare. Moreover, Shifeng could feel his affinity with mana increasing while bathed in this dense mana. He could also perceive the operating principles of mana with much greater clarity. This place was practically a weakened version of the ancient God's domain. However, compared to the mana environment, the changes to the Starlight Fortress's player population were even more shocking. Before Shifeng left to challenge the Divine Dragon's trial, the Starlight Fortress's player traffic had already reached a very frightening level. However, the present fortress's player population had more than tripled since then. Shifeng even spotted quite a few Tier 4 experts just on the street he was walking on. Moreover, he sensed the presence of at least 70 Tier 4 experts inside the Starlight Fortress. This number was simply mind-blowing. However, this still wasn't the most shocking part about the fortress. Compared to the Starlight Fortress's interior, the fortress's surroundings were much more crowded. From what Shifeng could tell, well over 1 million players were lining up to enter the fortress. These players weren't ordinary players. Even the weakest one among them was a Tier 3 player, and every one of them was at least at level 135. There were also Tier 4 experts standing in the queue. If not for these players standing in line obediently, Shifeng would have suspected that these people were aiming to capture the Starlight Fortress. However, before Shifeng could recover from his surprise, he saw a group of people charging through the main street toward the fortress's entrance. This group's leader was none other than Magic-Eye Goddess Phythalia, the commander of Divine Tribe's Divine Hymn Legion. At this time, Phythalia had reached not only Tier 4 but also level 145. Given the intensity of the mana she radiated, she had broken through her mana body's 100% threshold as well. From what Shifeng could tell, Phythalia should also have at least 2 fragmented legendary items on her. In her current state, she could probably hold her ground against a superior mythic monster of the same level. Moreover, aside from Phythalia, there were 3 other Tier 4s in the team she led. These 3 players were at the Void Realm standard and boasted 8 or more pieces of epic equipment. The only unfortunate part was that none of them had transcended the limits of their mana bodies. Even so, the strength of Phythalia's team was more than enough to raid superior mythic monsters of the same level. However, Phythalia and the others looked anxious as they rushed toward the entrance. Did something happen? Curious, Shifeng stealthily followed Phythalia's team. Divine Tribe could be considered Zero Wing's strategic ally on the western continent. Moreover, it was tasked with maintaining the Starlight Fortress's security on Zero Wing's behalf. Unless something major occurred, someone of Phythalia's status wouldn't take action. If need be, Shifeng naturally had to lend her a helping hand. Shortly afterward, Phythalia's team arrived at the Starlight Fortress's entrance. At this time, the players outside the entrance were staring curiously at a group of people standing before the fortress's checkpoint. To be precise, it was a mixed group of NPCs and players. Among these players were 5 Tier 4s. As for the NPCs, there were actually over a dozen Tier 4s among them. Why are people of the Blood Alliance here? Don't the superpowers in the Alliance mainly operate out at sea? It is indeed strange. From what I remember, they've never been active on land. Instead, they've been dominating the seas since the start of the game. Even the 5 great super guilds don't dare offend them out at sea. I heard that many naval forces have clashed with the Outer World's forces at sea. Although neither side managed to secure an advantage, the Blood Alliance suffered heavy losses in these clashes. Rumor has it that the Alliance has over 5 million Tier 3 casualties thus far. 3 of the Alliance's islands were razed to the ground. The players in the queue couldn't help starting heated discussions among themselves as they looked at the Tier 4 players and NPCs. While the Blood Alliance's sphere of operations was mostly limited to the sea, the Starlight Fortress was nowhere near the sea. Just teleporting from a coastal city to the Starlight Fortress cost nearly 6 gold coins. Are they greedy for the Starlight Fortress's benefits? That's probably the case. After all, the current Starlight Fortress is simply amazing. Its mana density and the benefits the mana provides are much greater than what you can find elsewhere on the continent. Not to mention, it is also near a God Mode regional dungeon. That can't be, right? Don't they know that a Tier 4 Divine Dragon is guarding this place? That's not something Tier 4 existences can go up against. While everyone wondered why members of the Blood Alliance had come to the Starlight Fortress, Phythalia's team arrived before the Blood Alliance group. Guild leader Brute, to what do we owe this sudden visit? Phythalia asked a thin man wearing a grey robe and carrying a dark wooden staff. The Blood Alliance had arrived with more than a dozen Tier 4 NPCs and 3 of the Blood Alliance's top 10 Tier 4 experts. It definitely wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the Blood Alliance came with bad intentions. Commander Phythalia, you don't need to be so nervous. We are not here to ask for trouble. Moreover, we aren't here to meet you, Brute said, smiling faintly. In fact, this matter doesn't have anything to do with Divine Tribe. We are simply here to find Zero Wing and negotiate a partnership. Negotiate a partnership with Zero Wing? Phythalia laughed at Brute's statement. I naturally don't have a say in such a matter. However, Seeing as you've brought so many Tier 4 NPCs with you, no matter how I look at it, it doesn't seem like you've come for a friendly negotiation. Read latest chapters at Wuxia I didn't call them here, Brute countered, shaking his head. These people are the representatives of various NPC naval forces. Representatives of NPC naval forces? Phythalia was surprised by Brute's answer. If only one NPC force had sent these Tier 4 NPCs, she wouldn't have found the situation strange. However, it was a different story if these NPCs represented multiple NPC forces. This was something she had to take seriously. In God's domain, the reason many kingdoms and empires had chosen not to spread their influence to the sea wasn't just the presence of powerful sea monsters. Another reason was the extraordinary strength of many NPC naval forces, with some even having Tier 5 NPCs leading them. Nodding, Brute said in an indisputable tone, "That's right. It's fine if you do not let us enter, Commander Phythalia. However, I don't mind letting you know that the Blood Alliance plans to requisition a portion of the Starlight Fortress's temporary residences to resist the Outer World invaders." Chapter 2856, Half-Step Tier 5, Requisition. Phythalia was momentarily stunned by Brute's words. "Have you lost your mind, Brute?" Phythalia wasn't the only person to have such thoughts. The spectating crowd thought so as well. The Blood Alliance, with its many superpowers and NPC forces, was indeed powerful. However, the Alliance's strength was only in the sea. On the Western continent, the Blood Alliance held no advantages. Since the Starlight Fortress was far from the sea, the Blood Alliance had no way to dispatch a large army to the Starlight Fortress. Moreover, the Starlight Fortress's defenses were something that even the 5 great super guilds were helpless against. After all, the fortress had a Tier 4 divine dragon guarding it. Even Tier 5 NPCs wouldn't dare go against such an existence. This was why Zero Wing could retain control over the Starlight Fortress despite having barely any of its own forces stationed on the Western continent. Otherwise, the surrounding NPC forces with Tier 5 NPCs leading them would have long since targeted the fortress. The only measure one could employ to suppress the Starlight Fortress was to place a thorough lockdown on the Star Valley. However, the Blood Alliance clearly didn't have the capability to pull off such a feat. Lost my mind? Laughing, Brute retorted, "I don't think so at all. The Starlight Fortress indeed possesses powerful defensive capabilities, and there are very few forces in God's domain capable of threatening it. However, if over 100 Tier 4 NPCs lock down the Star Valley, I wonder how long the Starlight Fortress will last." Over 100 Tier 4 NPCs? When Brute finished speaking, the spectating crowd gasped. Currently, not only were NPCs much higher leveled than players on average, but NPCs were also stronger than players of the same level and tier on average. This was because NPCs' weapons, equipment, skills, and spells were superior to those of the average player. Meanwhile, a force of more than 100 Tier 4 NPCs was something not even a kingdom possessed. In other words, the Blood Alliance could actually dispatch an entire kingdom's top combatants to seal a map. Moreover, I heard that the situation over on the Eastern continent is quite adverse, and many superpowers have already gotten annihilated. Even Zero Wing can barely keep itself afloat and can't roam about freely. In such a situation, obtaining resources will naturally be impossible, Brute said. Without the Starlight Fortress's resources, I believe Zero Wing will have even more difficulty surviving, right? Hence, we are inviting Zero Wing to become a member of the Blood Alliance right now. Not only will we help the Starlight Fortress develop, but we will also help Zero Wing defend against the Outer World invaders. Wouldn't this situation be the best of both worlds? Upon hearing Brute's proposal, nobody present could offer any rebuttals, not even Phythalia. The chaos on the Eastern continent was no longer a secret. The entire God's domain had been greatly shaken on the day the World Passage had opened, the sudden event catching countless powers off guard. After all, a group of unknown player forces had suddenly appeared and taken over many guild cities of first-rate guilds. In fact, these unknown player forces had even laid their hands on the guild cities of superpowers. Originally, these superpowers had planned to retaliate against these unknown invaders. However, when they marched their armies to reclaim their cities, they found a large number of experts already gathered in their captured cities. Moreover, there were even many Tier 45 among these players. Needless to say, none of the superpowers managed to recapture their cities. Initially, the various powers of God's domain thought that this was merely a hidden superpower making its public debut. After all, this wasn't the first time such a situation had taken place. Many player forces would continuously accumulate their strength in secret and make a powerful debut all of a sudden. Hence, the various powers of God's domain had not placed too much attention on this matter. However, the next day, over a dozen superpowers had suddenly made their presence known to the world, and the number of Tier 4 players these superpowers commanded far exceeded that of the local superpowers. On that very day, these new superpowers annihilated a local superpower and split up its territory among themselves. This war had thoroughly stupefied the various powers of God's domain. It was one thing to see a new superpower emerge, but it was another thing altogether to see so many superpowers appear out of the blue. Moreover, all of these superpowers boasted an incredible number of Tier 4 players. No matter how one looked at this situation, it was simply unbelievable. After a series of frantic investigations, the various powers of God's domain eventually discovered that these new superpowers didn't originate from their version of God's domain but from another God's domain. Moreover, the players belonging to these superpowers didn't live on Earth but on an interstellar continent. The human population of this interstellar continent rivaled that of Earth. Most importantly, the average combat standard of these interstellar continent residents was much higher than that of Earthlings. This was because the world of God's domain was everything for these people. In addition, these outer world superpowers were much stronger than the native superpowers. In fact, the two couldn't even be compared on the same level. In less than 5 days, these outer world superpowers had not only destroyed several native superpowers but even taken over 7 kingdoms. These kingdoms were now paradises for outer world NPCs, who rapidly harvested the various resources available in these kingdoms to keep growing stronger. Meanwhile, in response to these invaders, the various native kingdoms and empires had gathered players to fight off these outer world players and NPCs. The subsequent war was most likely one of the biggest in God's domain's history, as several dozen kingdoms and empires had joined hands to counter the invasion. And after fighting dozens of battles, both large and small, the Eastern Continent's native forces eventually managed to isolate the Outer World's NPC forces to one corner of the continent. However, in exchange for this outcome, the Eastern Continent's native forces had lost nearly 1/3 of their land. Moreover, this isolation affected only the Outer World's NPC forces. The Outer World's individual NPCs and player forces could still roam freely. In a situation where native players were inferior in terms of both levels and combat standards, the Eastern Continent's players were at an absolute disadvantage. Only by cooperating with native NPCs could they resist the Outer World players. It was obvious that the Eastern Continent's native forces would crumble in the near future as more and more Outer World players and NPCs invaded the Eastern Continent. In fact, it wouldn't be long before the Western Continent would get dragged into the war since the various sea zones were already engulfed in the flames of war. If the Starlight Fortress were to get isolated now, Zero Wing would definitely suffer immeasurable consequences. After all, due to the Outer World forces occupying many of the Eastern Continent's resource spots, prices of various resources had more than doubled. If Zero Wing were to lose the resources from the Starlight Fortress, the guild would most likely struggle to defend its guild cities. In this situation, Phythalia herself was powerless to do anything. Even if Divine Tribe were willing to help Zero Wing with all of its strength, there was no way Divine Tribe could win against a force of over 100 Tier 4 NPCs. Eventually, Phythalia sighed and said, "I understand. I'll convey your words to Zero Wing." "Good, then." Nodding, Brute said indifferently, "However, our patience is limited. Tell Zero Wing that they only have 1 day to reply. If they don't give us an answer by then, we will begin sealing the map immediately." 1 day. Phythalia frowned. This was too short. It was barely enough time for her to convey the message and for Zero Wing to hold a short discussion among its executives. Zero Wing wouldn't have any time to make the necessary preparations at all. That's right. Only one day. Zero Wing had best not waste any time. That wouldn't be beneficial to the Blood Alliance or Zero Wing. Brute said in a determined tone. I can even tell Zero Wing now that if they refuse our offer, while it might give the Blood Alliance some trouble, I can guarantee that they will suffer 100 times more than us. After Brute finished speaking, the Tier 4 NPCs standing behind him promptly unleashed their auras. The combined aura of over a dozen Tier 4 NPCs pressured even Phythalia. If not for the buff from standing inside the Starlight Fortress, she might have even succumbed to this mighty aura and stumbled back. As for the other Divine Tribe members, their complexions had paled. It was evident that they felt very uncomfortable beneath this frightening aura. However, just as Phythalia was about to speak up, a calm and deep voice suddenly entered everyone's ears. A partnership won't be necessary. Zero Wing doesn't need allies like you bunch. At this voice of rejection, everyone present turned reflexively toward its origin, curious to see who would be so bold as to decide for Zero Wing. Who said that? Come out. Brute, in particular, reacted with anger and displeasure. He never thought that someone would dare openly challenge the Blood Alliance. Black Flame. Zero Wing's guild leader has arrived already. When everyone present saw the cloaked man approaching Phythalia and Brute, they quickly recognized him, based on the two longswords hanging by his waist, as well as his dark and determined eyes. Guild leader Black Flame. Phythalia was stunned when she saw Shifeng. This was because Shifeng's present self was completely different from when she last met him. Not only did his body radiate frighteningly dense mana right now, but she could also sense a difference in life rating between them. Half-step Tier 5. When the elderly level 167, Tier 4 NPC at the head of the Blood Alliance's group saw Shifeng, he gasped in shock. Half-step Tier 5. How is this possible? When the surrounding players overheard the elderly NPC's words, they similarly gaped at Shifeng with astonished gazes. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU nowadays, Tier 4 players were no longer as rare as before. Hence, most Tier 3 players in God's domain no longer found Tier 4 players foreign. At the same time, they also knew just how difficult it was to get promoted from Tier 4 to Tier 5, as well as how wide the gulf between Tier 4 and Tier 5 existences was. Meanwhile, a half-step Tier 5 existence referred to Tier 4 individuals who had achieved an incredibly high standard in their control over mana and their mana body. After reaching this stage, so long as a Tier 4 individual successfully constructed a sufficiently strong mana body for themselves, they would become a Tier 5 existence, an existence even NPC empires feared greatly. Yet, in an era where mainstream players had just reached Tier 3 and only an extremely small number of experts had reached Tier 4, they were now being told that Shifeng had already reached the half-step Tier 5 standard. No matter how they thought about it, this didn't seem plausible. However, as a Tier 4 NPC had said these words, they were unlikely to be false. I said that. What kind of guidance do you have for me, I wonder, Guild Leader Brute? Shifeng asked calmly as he stared at Brute. Chapter 2857, Black Flame. Your Black Flame. Brute was stunned when he saw Shifeng. Half-step Tier 5. In the current era, where the various superpowers barely had any Tier 4 players under their command, a half-step Tier 5 existence was practically invincible. In fact, one would have difficulty finding a half-step Tier 5 existence even among the Outer Worlds players and NPCs, that's right. I am, Shifeng said, nodding. So, it's Guild Leader Black Flame. Everything before was only a misunderstanding. We don't have any intentions of isolating the Starlight Fortress, Brute said, smiling fawningly. Since you aren't interested in partnering with us, the Blood Alliance won't force the issue, Guild Leader Black Flame. If there is nothing else, we will take our leave now. As soon as Brute finished speaking, he turned around, planning to leave the Starlight Fortress together with the Blood Alliance's members. He had no intention of staying even a second longer. A misunderstanding. Shifeng laughed at Brute's words. Guild leader Brute, you brought over a dozen tier 4 NPCs and came all the way here to declare that you plan to isolate the Starlight Fortress, yet you're telling me this is a misunderstanding? Since you've already come here, then stay here. After saying so, Shifeng manifested his mana domain, enveloping a 4,000-yard radius in liquid mana. As soon as Shifeng unleashed his mana domain, Brute and the others stiffened. Their bodies felt indescribably heavy as if they had sunk into a swamp. The level 160+, tier 4 NPCs were just barely able to counter this suppression by releasing their own mana domains. However, none of them could manipulate the mana around them. Phythalia was astonished when Shifeng took action. She never thought that he would do so without a second word. After all, the Blood Alliance's side had more than a dozen tier 4 NPCs. While these NPCs might not be a match for Shifeng in a one-on-one fight, if they worked together, they could potentially take on even a tier 5 existence. Not good. This is world creation, the elderly tier 4 NPC leading the other NPCs exclaimed, an indescribably grim expression appearing on his face as he stared at Shifeng. The fact that Shifeng was at the half-step tier 5 standard was already plenty frightening. That, combined with his control over mana being at the world creation standard, meant he could fight tier 5 existences already. In front of such an expert, even a group of tier 4 individuals would be insignificant. What made tier 4 individuals much more powerful than tier 3 individuals was their ability to strengthen their abilities using the ambient mana. However, individuals who had reached the world creation standard could create a miniature world with their mana domain. All the mana within the domain would operate by rules favorable to the user and disadvantageous to hostile forces. Unless one had similarly reached the world creation standard, manipulating the ambient mana while standing in a world creation level mana domain would be impossible. One could only rely on the mana in one's body to do battle, essentially losing all the advantages of tier 4. World creation was something Shifeng achieved after his concentration had reached the tier 5 standard. To be precise, he had first reached the Grandmaster Magician standard after his concentration had reached the tier 5 standard, then, his mana domain had automatically transformed into a miniature world. He didn't even have to transform it consciously. Run! Brute shouted in a panic. Run? With your abilities? Shifeng unsheathed the Abyssal Blade and activated Darkness Bind. After getting upgraded to tier 4, Darkness Bind's range had improved tremendously. The next moment, pitch-black chains emerged from the void within a 500-yard radius and instantly constrained the Blood Alliance members' movements. The chains not only prevented the use of skills and spells but also drastically reduced their target's mobility. Shifeng appeared before the Blood Alliance members and brandished the Light of Two Worlds. Tier 4 Legacy Skill, Formless Blade. Swords Transmigration. 13 sword lights shot at the chests of Brute and the others, so fast that barely any of them managed to react to the attacks in time. Of the Blood Alliance players, only Brute, who had broken through the 100% threshold of his mana body, managed to activate a tier 4 defensive spell in time. Even so, the tier 4 barrier he summoned shattered after receiving Shifeng's attack. As for the other tier 4 players, none of them survived the attack. Even a tier 4 shield warrior died on the spot. The tier 4 NPCs fared a little better than the players. Because of their significant advantage in levels and equipment, they all managed to activate a tier 4 defensive skill or spell in time and block the attacks directed at them. Even so, having used up one of their life-saving measures, these NPCs wouldn't be able to reuse these skills and spells within a short time. However, Shifeng had no intention of giving the Blood Alliance's members any room to catch a breather. After completing his first attack, he promptly activated Blade Domain and executed Swords Transmigration once more. Under Shifeng's control, the 7 magic swords exhibited power at the tier 5 standard. Brute and the tier 4 NPCs were cornered and had no choice but to work together to cope with Shifeng's attacks. Despite not holding anything back, they were still forced to use their life-saving measures one after another. For a time, explosions and spatial tears roiled the entrance of the Starlight Fortress. After these noises continued for around 30 seconds, Brute and the Blood Alliance's Tier 4 NPCs all turned into ashes, becoming deader than dead. They died, just like that. So, this is Black Flame's strength? Amazing. Isn't he basically a Tier 5 now? The spectators gaped in shock when they saw the Blood Alliance's people annihilated, unable to get their minds around this situation for a long time. After all, Brute was a domain realm expert. If he worked together with more than a dozen Tier 4 NPCs, they could probably raid even Tier 5 legendary monsters. However, in front of Shifeng, these powerful individuals were like children. Throughout the fight, they could only defend themselves, they didn't have any leeway to retaliate or even heal themselves. Anyone who slipped up on their defense for even a moment got killed instantly. At this time, let alone the spectating crowd, even Phythalia was flabbergasted by this situation. She never thought that a person's combat power could achieve such frightening heights after reaching the half-step Tier 5 and world creation standards. With such combat power, Shifeng could probably go up against a true Tier 5 existence. Meanwhile, after killing the Blood Alliance's members, Shifeng didn't hesitate to pocket the items they dropped. Simultaneously, he marveled at the excellence of the items they dropped. Just the epic weapons and equipment he obtained numbered more than 10. Moreover, every one of them could be used up to level 150. After collecting his loot, Shifeng went to Phythalia's group and said gratefully, "Thank you for helping out with the Starlight Fortress's troubles throughout this period. If not for you all maintaining the fortress, it would have most likely become a mess long ago." From the Blood Alliance's movements, he could tell that many powers on the western continent already had their sights set on the Starlight Fortress. The threat of the Divine Dragon was no longer sufficient to ensure the Starlight Fortress's development. After all, so long as these powers isolated the Starlight Fortress and prevented other players from visiting it, they could easily stifle the fortress's development. "You exaggerate, Guild Leader Black Flame. However, you dealt a heavy blow to the Blood Alliance. The Alliance is unlikely to take this lying down," Phythalia said. She then added, "We have already conducted a thorough investigation into the Blood Alliance. It consists of more than 10 superpowers and quite a number of powerful NPC forces. Some of these NPC forces even have Tier 5 NPCs leading them. This is why even the Outer World invaders are just barely able to suppress the Blood Alliance and not defeat it outright. With Shifeng's strength, offending superpowers wouldn't be a problem." However, it was a different story for NPC forces. Now that NPCs were no longer restricted by the system, so long as there were sufficient benefits to be had, they would be more than willing to take action against players. If a Tier 5 NPC were to attack the Starlight Fortress, even if the fortress could remain standing, it would still be a nightmare for the fortress. "Relax. Even if a Tier 5 does come, they can do nothing," Shifeng said, chuckling nonchalantly. If it were before he had challenged the trial, he would indeed hesitate to clash with the Blood Alliance. However, he now had the ability to contend against Tier 5 existences. Not to mention, the Starlight Fortress even had Aurbeck guarding it. The Silver Divine Dragon could suppress even ordinary Tier 5 existences of the same level. "Do nothing?" Phythalia's eyes widened in shock. She couldn't help growing curious about the basis of Shifeng's confidence. In the current era where gods had secluded themselves, Tier 5 existences were considered the strongest combatants in God's domain. This was the same for the outer world. Every Tier 5 individual was a strategic existence that could single-handedly ensure the safety of a region. Hence, she found it inconceivable that Shifeng already had the ability to go up against Tier 5 existences. Not to mention, these were Tier 5 NPCs they were talking about, not Tier 5 players. "Commander Phythalia, may I trouble you to get me these materials?" Instead of explaining his confidence, Shifeng took out a list and handed it to Phythalia. "I am willing to purchase them using magic crystals at double the market value." After taking a look at the materials on the list, Phythalia found that although these materials were rare and valuable, gathering them shouldn't be a problem with Divine Tribe's abilities. "This shouldn't be a problem, but why would you want to purchase these materials at such a high price? With Zero Wings abilities, you should be able to gather these materials yourself. There's no need to pay double for them, much less pay in magic crystals, Phythalia asked as she looked at Shifeng strangely. Aside from the magic elven stone, the other materials on the list were relatively easy to obtain for a superpower. So long as Shifeng returned to the eastern continent, he could gather these materials at any time through Zero Wing. There was no need to pay such an exorbitant price. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU not bothering to hide his motives, Shifeng explained calmly, I don't have a choice. I urgently need these materials to connect the two continents. I won't have enough if I rely on only the Starlight Fortress's material stockpile, so I have to ask your guild to acquire them for me. Now that he could summon the divine dragon to his aid at any time, he could do many things that he dared not do before. Connect the two continents. Phythalia momentarily doubted her ears when she heard Shifeng's words. How is this possible? The two main continents of God's domain were incredibly far apart from each other. This was why the various superpowers had desperately contended over intercontinental teleportation arrays. Even so, these teleportation arrays came with a lot of limitations. If Shifeng really had a way to allow people to travel between the two continents freely, then that would be simply amazing. However, Shifeng just smiled in response to Phythalia's doubt and did not explain himself further. His past self would indeed be incapable of accomplishing such a feat. However, now that he was a Grandmaster Magician, combined with the Starlight Fortress's summoning tower, such a feat wasn't particularly difficult. Chapter 2858, Intercontinental Teleportation Magic Array Starlight Fortress, Summoning Tower. After spending over 80,000 magic crystals to purchase all of the materials he needed from Divine Tribe, Shifeng immediately began working on the Summoning Tower's teleportation array. The Summoning Tower's main purpose was to summon monsters. It was a construction unique to the Starlight Fortress. However, the Starlight Fortress itself could be considered a teleportation tower, as it possessed a teleportation array and a spatial node passed down since ancient times. These inheritances were what allowed the Summoning Tower to summon monsters from other worlds to fight for the Starlight Fortress. Under normal circumstances, it shouldn't be possible for the Summoning Tower to facilitate intercontinental teleportation. However, Shifeng was now a grandmaster in manipulating magic arrays. He even possessed a teleportation magic array design. Hence, he could make the impossible possible. Not to mention, he had also seen quite a few guild cities that possessed player-made intercontinental teleportation arrays in his previous life. To achieve intercontinental teleportation, one needed to fulfill 3 conditions. The first condition was to have a Grandmaster Magician. The second condition was to have a teleportation magic array design. The third and most important condition was to have a spatial node on one of the two continents. Only after fulfilling these 3 conditions could one construct an intercontinental teleportation magic array. Meanwhile, there weren't many spatial nodes on the two continents. In total, they numbered less than 20. Moreover, many of them were in dangerous forbidden lands. However, so long as one managed to secure a spatial node, they could freely travel between the two main continents, no longer subject to the various limitations of ancient intercontinental magic arrays. This was why Shifeng was adamant about acquiring the Starlight Fortress previously. The only flaw intercontinental teleportation arrays had was their colossal energy consumption. Instead of using magic crystals like ordinary teleportation arrays did, an intercontinental teleportation array required mana stones as fuel. Moreover, each teleportation cost 10 mana stones. If the job of synthesizing mana stones using magic crystals were left to a master alchemist, it would cost nearly 1,000 magic crystals per teleportation. With such a high cost, even superpowers wouldn't be able to afford to teleport people between continents in large numbers. However, even with such a limitation, the intercontinental teleportation array was still plenty amazing. After all, the two main continents had different resources. Trading in these resources could net massive profits. Moreover, transportation by teleportation was much more convenient than by air or by sea. Most importantly, an intercontinental magic array could allow a guild to synergize its forces on the two continents. This guild could operate on the two continents as if operating on a single continent, free of the problems arising from operating on two different continents. This was also one reason Shifeng had been desperately working to become a Grandmaster Magician all this time. As Shifeng was quietly constructing the Intercontinental Magic Array in the Summoning Tower, Divine Tribe's executives suddenly held a meeting in the guild's temporary residence in the Starlight Fortress. Phythalia, is what you say true? Can Black Flame really connect the two continents? Great Elder Adolf asked in disbelief as he looked at Phythalia. When Adolf heard that Shifeng had reached the half-step Tier 5 and world creation standards and single-handedly killed over a dozen Tier 4 NPCs, he had already been incredulous. Yet, Phythalia was now telling him that Shifeng could also create an intercontinental teleportation array. How could he possibly believe her? However, Adolf also understood one thing very clearly: Phythalia was never one to exaggerate things. Since she had said so, then this matter was most likely true. Only, he still couldn't help seeking further confirmation from her. With Black Flame's personality, it's unlikely he would lie. Not to mention, he doesn't have any reason to lie to us, Phythalia replied after giving the matter some thought. After all, even if he can't connect the two continents, with the strength and potential he has displayed and the Starlight Fortress's support, should Zero Wing fall on the eastern continent, it can easily rise again on the western continent. Zero Wing won't need our support at all. That makes sense. Adolf nodded. The Starlight Fortress had a Tier 4 divine dragon guarding it. Unless a Tier 6 god or a group of Tier 5 existences attacked the fortress, nothing could threaten the fortress. Not to mention, Shifeng was already highly likely to get promoted to Tier 5. Whether it was now or in the future, he definitely couldn't be underestimated. The reason I called everyone here is to recommend that we deepen our partnership with Zero Wing, Phythalia said as she took out a set of documents detailing the Eastern Continent's situation. After sending a copy to everyone present, she continued, "This is the latest report on the Eastern Continent's state of affairs. Several more superpowers have come from the outer world recently. Although there shouldn't be any large-scale battles occurring between the outer world invaders and the Eastern Continent's natives, friction between the two sides will definitely occur one way or another. Meanwhile, Zero Wing's resources are extraordinary. A battle between Zero Wing and the outer world invaders is inevitable. Hence, I propose that we have some of the guild's Tier 4s head to the Eastern Continent to support Zero Wing. This way, Divine Tribe will have some initiative in future partnerships with Zero Wing." When Phythalia finished speaking, everyone present promptly nodded in agreement. Before today, they had merely treated Zero Wing as an ordinary superpower and did not put much thought into their partnership with the guild. However, after today's incident, they could no longer afford to do so. This was because Zero Wing possessed not only a half-step Tier 5 expert but also an intercontinental teleportation array linking the two continents. Once word of this teleportation array got out, the Starlight Fortress would undoubtedly become the Western Continent's focal point. At that time, the Starlight Fortress's income would definitely multiply by tenfold or more. If Divine Tribe could get a cut of this pie, it would be of significant help to the guild. With Divine Tribe's foundations, the resources from the Starlight Fortress might even allow it to rival the 5 great super guilds. I don't see any problem with this. Looking at Phythalia, Adolf pondered for a moment before saying, "Since we are going to help Zero Wing on the Eastern Continent, Phythalia, take McCaffrey and Crimson with you. The two of them should be able to help Zero Wing solve many problems." "Thank you, Great Elder." Phythalia was overjoyed when she heard Adolf's words. McCaffrey and Crimson, which were top combatants of Divine Tribe. The two of them possessed fragmented legendary items and were fully geared in epic weapons and equipment. Most importantly, both had broken through the 100% threshold of their mana bodies. Crimson, which, in particular, had even reached the 105% completion rate. Adolf aside, the completion rate of Crimson Witch's mana body was the highest in Divine Tribe. If not for Phythalia owning a fragmented legendary weapon, she wouldn't be a match for Crimson Witch. "I'll contact the two of them in a moment. As for everything else, I'll leave it up to you," Adolf said, nodding. Originally, Adolf had other plans for McCaffrey and Crimson Witch. However, taking into account Zero Wing's potential, he deemed deepening Divine Tribe's relationship with Zero Wing much more valuable. Shortly after Divine Tribe's executives concluded their meeting, Shi Feng completed the Intercontinental Teleportation Array at the top of the summoning tower. Good. The spatial coordinates are stable. Now, I just need to set up a corresponding teleportation array on the Eastern Continent, and the two continents will be connected. Shi Feng nodded in satisfaction as he looked at the Intercontinental Teleportation Array before him. This Intercontinental Magic Array was definitely his best creation since he began playing God's Domain. Not only did constructing this magic array require a lot of knowledge and understanding of the various elements of mana, but he also had to convert a Master Teleportation Magic Array into a Grandmaster Teleportation Magic Array. The difficulty of such a feat was simply extraordinary. Shi Feng suddenly received a call soon after completing the Intercontinental Teleportation Array. Guild Leader Black Flame, I have already arranged the matter you asked before, Phythalia said as she looked at Shi Feng through the video chat. Smiling, she continued, you can head over to the Eastern Continent together with us at any time. If it's the Intercontinental Teleportation Array in the Hell Forest City's secret land, we should be able to reach the Eastern Continent in less than 2 days. Together? Surprised by Phythalia's words, Shi Feng asked, you plan on heading to the Eastern Continent as well, Commander Phythalia? From what he understood, Divine Tribe had never shown any interest in the Eastern Continent. The guild had always focused on the Western Continent. Not to mention, the current Eastern Continent was an incredibly dangerous place. Most importantly, Divine Tribe had to pay a huge price to send people to the Eastern Continent. The superpowers controlling ancient intercontinental teleportation arrays normally charged around 8,000 magic crystals and various precious materials per person when facilitating travel between the two continents. Moreover, this was still considered a friendship price. Even for a superpower, having many people travel between the two continents would still be a considerable expenditure. In response to Shi Feng's question, Phythalia nodded and smiled. Micham. Our guild has some matters to deal with on the Eastern Continent. I'm afraid we will have to trouble you at that time, Guild Leader Black Flame. You're being too polite, Commander Phythalia. Your guild has helped me plenty on the Western Continent, Shi Feng said, chuckling. If you encounter any trouble on the Eastern Continent, feel free to look for me. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU, since you've said so, I definitely won't hold back when that time comes, Guild Leader Black Flame, Phythalia said, her smile turning even brighter. Naturally. Shi Feng nodded. Besides Divine Tribe's status on the Western Continent, just being able to form friendly relations with Phythalia herself was already well worth his time. After all, there weren't many players capable of reaching Tier 6 in God's Domain. Shi Feng ended his call with Phythalia, then sorted out the Starlight Fortress's income. He collected the 14 million gold and 930,000 magic crystals the fortress earned during this period and made his way to the fortress's entrance. And after he met up with Phythalia's group of 3, they promptly made their way to the Hell Forest City's secret land's Intercontinental Teleportation Array. After waiting for more than a day for the teleportation array to activate, Shi Feng transformed into a streak of light and disappeared from the secret land. Chapter 2859, Returning to the Eastern Continent, Demon Mist Valley, what rotten luck. We actually got teleported to a forbidden land. Crimson Witch frowned as she observed the faint red mist surrounding her. Divine Tribe had conducted a thorough investigation into the forbidden lands on both continents. This was because these locations were incredibly dangerous, current players couldn't visit them. Moreover, players would first have to exit the Forbidden Land before they could teleport out of the map. After players entered level 100+ maps, it was found that these maps possessed plenty of spatial tears and random teleportation points. Any one of these traps had a high chance of teleporting players to dangerous locations like Forbidden Lands. Hence, to reduce the chances of their important combatants dying after getting teleported forcibly to a forbidden land, the superpowers investigated the various forbidden lands and provided this information to their members. The Demon Mist Valley was one of the better-known forbidden lands on the Eastern Continent. The reason for its fame was the red mist shrouding the map all year round. Anyone who entered this place, even Tier 48, would have their physique and senses heavily suppressed, unable to exert even half of their normal combat power. In addition, the monsters in the Demon Mist Valley possessed incredibly powerful defense and magic resistance. The weakest monster here was a level 130 Great Lord. There were also plenty of mythic monsters and even superior mythic monsters. Even Tier 4 experts would have a very low chance of survival if they got sent to this forbidden land unprepared. Hence, the various superpowers had placed particularly great importance on the Demon Mist Valley. Our luck isn't all that bad. At least we didn't get sent to the central region. We're only at the boundary between the inner and outer regions, McCaffrey, the Silver Lion Legion's vice-commander, said after checking his map. Pointing at the valley in the forest in front, he continued, "We should reach the outer region in 3 hours if we head in that direction." The Demon Mist Valley did not just prevent teleportation, but its red mist also prevented Tier 4 players from flying. In fact, even flying mounts could only walk here. Guild leader Black Flame, let us hurry out of here. We'll get surrounded by monsters if we stay for too long. At that time, leaving the Demon Mist Valley will become even more troublesome, Vithalia suggested as she looked at Shurfeng. Although the red mist heavily suppressed players' perception, the monsters inside the Demon Mist Valley were unaffected. Hence, monsters would almost always notice players before players detected them. In addition, now that monsters in God's domain had gained self-awareness and greater intelligence, they would almost always ambush players in packs. Not to mention, their group was currently in the Demon Mist Valley's inner region. According to Divine Tribe's research, the chances of a superior mythic monster appearing here was quite high. Quite a number of mythic monsters also roamed the area. If their group caused a huge commotion, it could easily attract a pack of mythic monsters. Even for Tier 4 players like themselves, fighting multiple mythic monsters was very dangerous. Sure. Shurfeng nodded. After arriving in the Demon Mist Valley, he had already spread his senses. Despite his perception getting suppressed to just a 2,000-yard radius, he still managed to discover 2 mythic monsters and more than 30 level 140+ Grand Lords. It would indeed be very troublesome if their small group had to fight against all these monsters. Following this, the group of 4 made their way into the valley under Shurfeng's lead. Now that Shurfeng's concentration had reached the Tier 5 standard and his control over mana had achieved world creation, even after walking through the valley for over an hour, the 4 did not come across a single battle. This situation confused Vithalia and the others, and they could only assume that an army of players had cleared this valley recently. However, as the group approached the outer region, the density of the monsters in the area also increased. Although Shurfeng had a perception range of 2,000 yards, he still had greater difficulty finding a safe route to travel. Huh? Players? Suddenly, Shurfeng detected strong mana fluctuations coming from a forest some distance ahead, indicating a battle taking place there. After advancing a little more, the group even began hearing sounds of battle. Shortly after hearing the noise, the group saw a level 145 superior mythic ranked 4-winged feathered dragon rising from the forest 1,000 yards away. The feathered dragon then used a breath attack, turning the forest within a 500-yard radius into ash. Along with the destruction of a portion of the forest, 3 figures, 1 female and 2 males entered the sight of Shurfeng's group. These 3 players were all Tier 4 players. Shurfeng even recognized 2 of them. One was 16th Cloud, the second vice-guild leader of Shining Tiger, the other was the assassin Sorrowful Silence. The only reason the trio managed to survive the feathered dragon's breath attack was the Tier 4 Guardian Knight of the group. However, after taking on that breath attack, the Guardian Knight did not have much HP remaining. None of the 3 was a healer either, so the Guardian Knight could only rely on potions to heal himself. Evidently, it wouldn't be long before they fell to the superior mythic monster. Damn it. To think we'll actually die here. 16th Cloud, who wielded a crimson staff, glared at the 4-winged feathered dragon's 60-meter-long frame with inevitable frustration. That's right. We should have fought those people outside instead. It would be much better than getting killed by this monster, Sorrowful Silence said, nodding in agreement. There's no helping it. Who would have thought we would encounter such a monster as soon as we ducked into the inner region? 16th Cloud said with a bitter smile. I guess fate really wants us dead. They had gone to great lengths to escape the Outer World experts' pursuit, running all the way from the Demon Mist Valley's outer region to the inner region. Originally, they thought they could lose those Outer World experts after hiding in the inner region. They never imagined that a superior mythic monster might be guarding the border. The four-winged feather dragon wasn't just a superior mythic monster. It was also the realm lord of this area. Even a 20-man Tier 4 team would have difficulty fighting it under normal circumstances, what more under the Demon Mist Valley's suppression. And worse, the feathered dragon could fly. There was no way to escape it. Players that encountered the feathered dragon had only two options, kill it or be killed by it. There was no third option. However, before 16th Cloud and Sorrowful Silence could continue their conversation, the feathered dragon flapped its two sets of wings, sending countless wind blades at the three players. The boss did not give the trio a chance to catch a breather. Upon seeing the approaching wind blades, 16th Cloud swung her crimson staff, instantly raising a wall of flames in front of the three. The wall of flames rose over 100 meters, blocking all the oncoming wind blades. And once the flames stopped the attacks, they transformed into a phoenix that flew toward the feathered dragon. Tier 4 Curse, Phoenix Flame. Phoenix Flame was actually a Tier 4 offensive curse. However, 16th Cloud not only utilized it as if it were a defensive curse but even switched it to offense afterward. Her mastery of this Tier 4 curse was simply superb. However, just as the phoenix was about to devour the feathered dragon, the latter suddenly let loose a deafening roar. Immediately afterward, the flames making up the phoenix got extinguished one after another. The phoenix eventually disappeared before it could reach the feathered dragon's body. Mana Annihilation. 16th Cloud was thunderstruck when she saw the flames disappearing, her mind unable to accept this situation. If the flames had merely failed to damage the feathered dragon because they lacked power, she would still be able to understand it. However, as she held full control over the flames, she could tell that the flames hadn't died naturally. Instead, they got extinguished because the mana used to create and fuel them had been annihilated. How can a boss hold such a skill? This is cheating. Sorrowful Silence fell into despair as he looked at the feathered dragon. Although he didn't know the exact details of the situation because he wasn't the creator of those flames, he could tell that those flames had died due to mana annihilation. In other words, all spells would be a joke in front of the feathered dragon. Moreover, as an inferior dragon, the four-winged feathered dragon possessed incredible defense. If magical attacks were ineffective against it, it would be a nigh-invincible existence. After destroying 16th Cloud's curse, the feathered dragon flapped its wings and sent wind blades at the three players once more. It seems this is the end for us. Looking at the innumerable oncoming wind blades, 16th Cloud could only shrug helplessly and wait for death to claim her. Originally, she had hoped her Tier 4 curse would heavily injure the feathered dragon, creating an opportunity for their party to escape. However, let alone heavily injuring the feathered dragon, she couldn't even damage it. In front of an inferior dragon capable of using mana annihilation, an elementalist like herself was nothing but a joke. She was of no threat to it at all. Yet, just as the countless wind blades were about to strike 16th Cloud and the others, a magic barrier suddenly emerged from the ground before them. The barrier stopped the wind blades, releasing the trio from death's grip. Crystalline Barrier. When 16th Cloud saw the shattered magic barrier in front of her, she immediately recognized the Tier 4 spell used to create it. With his keen eyes, Sorrowful Silence quickly noticed some figures emerging from the distant forest. Vice Guild Leader, there are people coming from over there. At Sorrowful Silence's words, 16th Cloud promptly turned toward the direction he indicated. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. What entered her vision were 4 people, 2 male and 2 females, emerging from the forest roughly 500 yards away. It was evident that these 4 people were responsible for the Tier 4 defensive spell that had saved their party. Black Flame. When 16th Cloud saw one of the cloaked men of the group, she couldn't help her surprise. She had met with the man known as Black Flame once before, when negotiating with Zero Wing for partnership on behalf of Shining Tiger. However, after that event, she had paid very little attention to Zero Wing, focusing it all on developing Shining Tiger's forces in the Glory Empire. If not for Shifeng having accomplished astonishing feats that shook the entirety of God's domain, she would have long since forgotten his appearance. Chapter 2860, Eastern Continent Situation. 16th Cloud and the others noticed the three people moving behind Shifeng and were stunned when they saw the faces of these three people. No way. Commander Phythalia of Divine Tribe's Divine Hymn Legion is here. Isn't Divine Tribe active only on the Western Continent? She's not here alone. Even the Silver Lion Legion's Vice Commander McCaffrey and Divine Tribe's Crimson Witch are here. Both of them are Divine Tribe's top combatants. Crimson Witch is probably the one who helped us just now. Why did they come here all of a sudden? Although Divine Tribe wasn't famous on the Eastern Continent, it was very well known on the Western Continent. The guild's development had even skyrocketed recently, and it was now in existence close to rivaling the 5 great super guilds. Naturally, Divine Tribe was many times stronger than a recently established superpower like Shining Tiger. Yet, 3 of Divine Tribe's top combatants were now here. With the ability of these 3 people, they could normally preside over the guild affairs on their own. Having the 3 of them together was akin to Divine Tribe having its trump card Legion stroll down the street of a city. Unless Divine Tribe was planning an important operation, such an action would be a complete waste of manpower. However, before 16th Cloud and the others could recover from their surprise, Phythalia and McCaffrey suddenly appeared beside the 4-winged feathered dragon. Phythalia promptly brandished her longsword and bombarded the Realm Lord with a rain of sword lights. As for McCaffrey, he raised his greatsword and stabbed it into the ground. Subsequently, massive greatswords emerged from the ground and stabbed at the airborne feathered dragon. Compared to the Shining Tiger trio, Phythalia and McCaffrey evidently had far superior control over mana. Their ordinary Tier 4 skills nearly rivaled Tier 5 skills in power. They also perfectly coordinated their attacks, such that the feathered dragon could only defend against the attack of one and had no choice but to take the attack of the other. -31,654,215. Damage exceeding 30 million appeared above the feathered dragon's head, the attack provoking a pained cry from the superior mythic. Although this amount of damage was nothing compared to the feathered dragon's nearly 20 billion HP, 16th Cloud and the others couldn't even damage the Realm Lord. And how strong! So, these are Divine Tribe's top combatants? 16th Cloud was astonished when she saw the combat prowess Phythalia and McCaffrey displayed. Although 16th Cloud recognized that she still couldn't rank at the very top of God's domain in terms of combat power, she was still a Domain Realm Tier 4 expert. She was also fully equipped with epic equipment. Yet, compared to Phythalia and McCaffrey, she still had a long way to go before reaching the top of God's domain. However, before Shining Tiger's trio could overcome their shock from Phythalia and McCaffrey's display of power, an overbearing sword light suddenly cut through space and sliced off one of the feathered dragon's claws. The attack wrenched an agonized shriek from the feathered dragon, and its HP instantly plunged by more than 100 million. The horrified feathered dragon immediately flapped its wings and fled the scene like a powerful storm, not daring to remain for even a moment longer. The feathered dragon was much faster than the average Tier 4 flying mount. Upon seeing this scene, 16th Cloud and the others reflexively turned toward the origin of the sword light with stunned looks on their faces. This was because the origin of this sword light was none other than Shifeng. Currently, he radiated a mana so dense that it was liquid. How is this possible? 16th Cloud gaped in shock at Shifeng. Not only did Shifeng scare a superior mythic-ranked Realm Lord away with one attack, but the strength of his mana was simply unbelievable. The density of his mana was something she had seen radiating from only Tier 5 NPCs. However, while the information Shining Tiger obtained said that Shifeng was indeed powerful to the point where he could slay Tier 4 NPCs, it did not say that he was this powerful. The attack Shifeng had used to scare the feathered dragon away wasn't a skill because the attack did not create any mana fluctuations whatsoever. It was an ordinary attack executed with a combat technique. Meanwhile, seeing the feathered dragon fly away left Shifeng feeling a little frustrated. How unfortunate. The demon Mist Valley's restraint prevented even him from flying. Hence, if a flying monster fled from him, he had no way of catching up. Not to mention, the four-winged feathered dragon was even a realm lord. This was why players had an incredibly difficult time killing mythic monsters or above in forbidden lands that prevented flight. After all, the majority of the mythic monsters in forbidden lands could fly. Unless players prepared an ambush beforehand, they could, at most, repel mythic monsters but not kill them. Are you three alright? After seeing the feathered dragon flying into the distance, Shifeng approached 16th Cloud's group and asked curiously, "This isn't a place ordinary tier 4s can visit. Why did you come here?" Unlike the ruined mountain range, which was a forbidden land only for humans, the Demon Mist Valley was a forbidden land for all life, much more dangerous than the ruined mountain range. Tier 4 players traveling alone or in a small group could only explore the valley's outer region, at most. Normally, if players wished to enter the Demon Mist Valley's inner region, they needed a team of 20 Tier 4 players at the very least. Meanwhile, 16th Cloud's group only had 3 people. Entering the valley's inner region was a death sentence for them. "You misunderstand us, Guild Leader Black Flame. If possible, we wouldn't have chosen to enter this place either," 16th Cloud replied with a bitter smile. "The 3 of us entered this place because we had no other choice. Otherwise, the Outer World Tier 4 experts chasing us would have long since killed us." She was both Shining Tiger's second vice guild leader and a Tier 4 domain realm expert. If it were a month ago, nobody would believe her if she told them that other players were hunting her and had even driven her into a desperate situation. In fact, if 16th Cloud had come across such a situation, she definitely wouldn't tell anyone about it. Now, however, 16th Cloud did not mind revealing this matter to an outsider at all. She also didn't find it damaging to her self-esteem. On the contrary, she even felt proud about the situation. "The 3 of you were actually cornered? Is the Eastern Continent's situation that bad?" Shifeng was surprised by 16th Cloud's words. In his previous life, Tier 4 experts remained existences that could not be underestimated, even 10 years after God's Domain's launch. Even superpowers with Tier 5 and Tier 6 experts wouldn't have an easy time targeting and hunting down Tier 4 experts keen on escaping. After all, there were simply far too few experts in God's Domain capable of getting promoted to Tier 4, and the bare minimum requirement for players to participate in a hunt for Tier 4 players was to be Tier 4 themselves. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to catch up with and surround the targeted Tier 4 player at all. And while Tier 5 and Tier 6 experts were indeed capable of overpowering Tier 4 experts in a head-on fight, they had to track down their target first before they could do anything. Hence, even for the various superpowers, hunting down Tier 4 experts was a headache. Yet, 16th Cloud's group of 3 Tier 4 experts was actually getting hunted. This told Shifeng that the Eastern Continent was in far direr straits than what Divine Tribe's report described. "Guild Leader Black Flame, you must have been away from the Eastern Continent during this period, right?" 16th Cloud wasn't particularly surprised by Shifeng's question. Without withholding any information, she replied, "A few days ago, another 10 or so Outer World superpowers arrived on the Eastern Continent. One of these superpowers is incredibly strong, probably on the level of the 5 great super guilds. This superpower has many Tier 4s, as well as Tier 3 experts that exhibit combat power at the Tier 4 standard. Because of this superpower's appearance, the originally stable situation on the Eastern Continent changed instantly. Previously, the Tier 4 experts of the Eastern Continent's superpowers could still roam the Demon Mist Valley's outer region. Now, however, let alone grinding peacefully in the outer region, we'd be fortunate not to get hunted by those outer world experts." Previously, there had indeed been a huge difference between the Eastern Continent's superpowers and the Outer World's superpowers. However, it wasn't as if the Eastern Continent's superpowers were utterly helpless to fight back. After all, even in the Outer World, reaching Tier 4 wasn't easy. As a result, the Outer World's superpowers did not have many Tier 4 players under their command either. However, after that superpowers showed up, the Outer World's forces suddenly gained a slew of Tier 4 combatants. This instantly shattered the balance between the two sides and placed native Tier 4 experts like herself at an absolute disadvantage. Almost all of the Eastern Continent's resource-rich maps had already become the backyard of those Outer World players, and trying to level up in these maps was now a monumental challenge for native players. I see. No wonder you ran all the way here. Shifeng finally understood the situation. There were many ways in God's domain to allow Tier 3 experts to possess Tier 4 combat power. Besides Tier 3 mana set equipment, combat arrays were more than capable of doing the job. However, combat arrays were incredibly rare, and producing them was also extremely troublesome. This was especially true when it came to the materials required. Nevertheless, so long as one managed to manufacture combat arrays capable of granting Tier 3 players Tier 4 combat power, one would be more than capable of dealing with Tier 4 players. After all, the precondition for Tier 4 players' invulnerability to Zerg tactics was that their opponents were Tier 3 combatants or weaker. If a Tier 4 player had to go up against a group of Tier 4 players, even a Tier 4 Apex expert would be pushed to the brink of death very quickly. Guild Leader Black Flame, if you plan on leaving the Demon Mist Valley, I'd advise you to wait here for the time being. We entered this place just recently, so those Outer World experts are probably still hanging around the outer region, 16th Cloud said. Although those Tier 3 experts with Tier 4 combat power are strong, their resistance to the foreign energy in the environment is still at the Tier 3 standard, so they can't stay in a forbidden land for too long. Judging by Shifeng's reactions, 16th Cloud guessed that the man had not been updated about the Eastern Continent's situation for quite some time now. Although Shifeng was indeed extraordinarily strong and even had 3 powerful experts following him, his group would most likely still face a bitter battle if it had to go up against a large number of Tier 4 combatants. If the 4 weren't careful, they might even end up losing their lives. At present, the wisest option would be to wait until those Tier 4 combatants had left the Forbidden Land. Thank you for the warning, but that won't be necessary. Shifeng shook his head in response to 16th Cloud's advice. After voicing his gratitude, he promptly led Phythalia and the others out of the inner region. Read latest chapters at Wuxia EU. When Shifeng's party of 4 had gotten several hundred yards away, Sorrowful Silence and the Tier 4 Guardian Knight turned to 16th Cloud. What should we do now? Sorrowful Silence asked. Do we wait here? Now that the 4-winged feathered dragon had fled this place, they should be safe for some time. We don't have a choice. Let's follow Guild Leader Black Flame, 16th Cloud replied, gritting her teeth. It might be impossible to break out of the encirclement with just the 3 of us, but with the strength of Guild Leader Black Flame's group, we should have a chance. 16th Cloud and the others ran after Shifeng's group. Chapter 2861, Natives. Demon Mist Valley, Outer Region. Due to the red mist shrouding the Demon Mist Valley all year round, the Forbidden Land was very humid, abounding with lush vegetation. Unlike the plants found in the outside world, the plants here seemed self-aware as they constantly moved about slowly. This made one feel they were traversing a maze when they traveled through the valley. Damn it! Those people sure know how to run. If they'd just tamely let us kill them, we wouldn't have to suffer so much. A level 143, Tier 4 female swordsman grumbled in dissatisfaction. That might be the case, but we also have to thank these people, a level 143, Tier 4 male berserker standing beside the female swordsman said. If not for these native Tier 4 experts, we wouldn't have an opportunity to earn alliance contribution points. I guess that's true. So long as we gather a few more points, we will be able to stay in the luxury zone where those major powers stay, the female swordsman said, nodding. A hint of anticipation flashing across her eyes, she continued, I heard that the luxury zone even sells drugs that extend one's lifespan. We can also use the extra points we earn to exchange for those drugs. I've heard about them too. Normally, those things are reserved for the upper-class young masters and young ladies. Ordinary people like us have no chance to touch these things, said a middle-aged man who was a level 145, tier 4 elementalist. Now, though, those major powers have no choice but to ask professionals like us for help to take over this backwater world. It's a pity that the natives here are too inferior. Their control over mana, skills, and spells is terribly clumsy. If they were a little better, we would have more targets to hunt and more points to earn. As these tier 4 players were chatting merrily, a party of players was eyeing them with contempt. These mercenaries really know how to dream. Do they think they can exchange for those life-extending drugs so easily? Jade Leaf commented as she looked at the bragging tier 4 experts in disdain. Even our guild has trouble getting our hands on a few bottles, yet they think mercenaries like them can exchange for some. Jade, you can't say that. If we don't provide these people with some benefits, how would we get them to work for us? Awakened Abyss said, smiling. Moreover, thanks to this operation, we also get to exchange for those precious life-extending drugs without limit this time. This is a rare opportunity from the higher-ups. In the world they lived in, life-extending drugs were incredibly precious items. Even children of major families like themselves had great difficulty getting their hands on a bottle. However, they could now use the Alliance contribution points they earned from killing native tier 4 experts to exchange for these drugs, a precious opportunity, even for them. After all, who wouldn't want to live a longer life? Before Awakened Abyss could continue speaking, a level 144, tier 4 ranger suddenly approached him in a hurry. Commander, we found traces of a group of people. These should be auras left behind by natives, the ranger reported in a quiet tone. 3 of the auras belong to the 3 people we were pursuing earlier. Good. Gather everyone for an ambush. Awakened Abyss commanded with a smile. So long as we kill them once, we'll see how Shining Tiger will continue bringing their members here to grind. The main reason the Eastern Continent's native superpowers continued to survive was their tier 4 experts leading teams into Forbidden Lands to grind. Killing the native superpowers tier 4 experts once would be more than enough to deal a heavy blow to the native superpowers, especially if the death penalty players suffered were increased. While EXP meant very little to tier 4 players, it was a different story for weapons and equipment. If tier 4 experts suddenly lost 2 or 3 pieces of their equipment, the native superpowers would definitely suffer heartache. It would also be very challenging for these native tier 4 experts to recover from their losses. Understood. At Awakened Abyss's command, the ranger promptly contacted the other members of their hunting group to gather at the specified ambush point. In a woodland in the Demon Mist Valley's outer region. If we continue running in this direction for another 4 to 5 hours, we should be able to leave the Demon Mist Valley, 16th Cloud said excitedly as she pointed at a mountain range looming in the distance. The Demon Mist Valley's terrain continuously changed. The one constant in this place was the mountains. Meanwhile, the distant mountain range was none other than the 1/16th Cloud's party had passed through to enter the Forbidden Land. The sight of this same mountain range meant that their journey was nearing its end. Once they left the Demon Mist Valley, they could teleport to safety using a return scroll. At that time, the Outer World invaders wouldn't be able to chase them. Sorrowful Silence and the Tier 4 Guardian Knight also grew excited when they saw the distant mountain range. The 3 of them had been inflicted with a curse that drastically increased the death penalty they suffered and would randomly resurrect them within the Forbidden Land. Previously, they thought that they no longer had any hope of surviving this ordeal. Now, their hopes were rekindled. It would have been incredibly difficult for their party of 3 to escape the outer region by themselves. After all, the outer region had not only Outer World players hunting them but also powerful monsters roaming everywhere. If they got entangled with monsters for too long, the resulting commotion would definitely attract the Outer World players to them. However, when following Shifeng's party of 4, they actually did not encounter a single monster. It was as if those monsters had vanished from the map. They had to marvel at Shifeng's party's heaven-defying luck. Now, all they needed to do was run to that distant mountain range. After that, they would be able to fly freely in the sky like birds. However, when the 7 arrived at the foot of the mountain range, a magic barrier suddenly enveloped them. Given its 1,000-yard radius, one could easily tell that it was at the master standard. Even superior mythic monsters would have difficulty breaking out of it. Not good. We got fooled. 16th Cloud's complexion paled when she saw the barrier forming. She had thought that they had already shaken off the Outer World players' pursuit. Evidently, these Outerworlders had simply waited for them to throw themselves into this trap. With this area sealed with a master magic barrier, they had no hope of escaping whatsoever. Just then, a savage and brawny level 145 man emerged from the forest in front of Shifeng's group and said with a sadistic look, "You people have made me wait for a very long time. Let's see how you get out of this situation now." The last time his hunting group had come across Shining Tiger's party, it should have succeeded in annihilating the trio. However, the instant 16th Cloud noticed the ambush, she had decisively fled with her party before his hunting group could trap them with a barrier. This time, his hunting group had discovered traces of 16th Cloud's party early and managed to discern where the party was heading. And with this information, his hunting group could easily set up an ambush. At this time, 16th Cloud couldn't help looking at Shifeng with guilt. Guild leader Black Flame, this is all my fault. If I had suggested we take another exit, they wouldn't have caught us. The Demon Mist Valley didn't have just one exit. Had they chosen any of the other exits instead, they wouldn't have gotten trapped. Vice Commander Cloud, you don't need to blame yourself, Shifeng said, shaking his head. After all, I was the one who asked you to find the nearest exit. Even if you didn't guide us, we would have had to clean up these hindrances sooner or later. Upon hearing Shifeng's words, the approaching brawny man automatically frowned. Read latest chapters at Wuxia EU, clean up us hindrances. What big words you have there. Commander Eagle, why are you wasting time speaking with these people? These ignorant natives just don't know how large the gap between them and us is. Let's just get rid of them now. Shifeng's words enraged the Outer World players surrounding his party. In their opinion, the residents of this god's domain were no different from natives living in an undeveloped wilderness. Yet, these natives weren't kneeling and begging them for mercy but even treating them like annoying flies. Such arrogance was beyond salvation. However, while the Outer World hunting group's 30+ Tier 4 experts and 100+ Tier 3 experts were raising a ruckus, the brawny man leading them turned his gaze toward Awakened Abyss's group. Commander Abyss, you're finally here. May I know if your group will be taking action, or will you leave it to us? Chapter 2862, Hunter. Or Hunted. Quasi-Eagle's words agitated the Tier 4 experts around him so much that they wished they could charge forward and finish off the 7 native players in front of them immediately. Currently, the Alliance's price for native Tier 4 experts was 300 contribution points per kill. If a curse was used on the kill, they would receive 1,000 points. These prices represented a fortune, even for the luxury zone's residents, let alone residents of the commoner zone like themselves. If converted into income, 1,000 Alliance contribution points were equivalent to 10 years of salary for an ordinary person living in the luxury zone. Indeed, the Interstellar Alliance's bounty for native Tier 4s was that high. This demonstrated the Interstellar Alliance's determination in acquiring this god's domain. More importantly, Alliance contribution points could be exchanged for money but not vice versa. Meanwhile, Alliance contribution points could be used to exchange for many items and resources that normally could not be bought with money. Hence, the 7 Tier 4 players in front of them were basically walking treasure troves. Even if they split the points among their group, they would still earn a significant income. However, Awakened Abyss did not respond to Quasi-Eagle's question. Instead, he stared at the group of native players in front of him. More precisely, he was looking at the cloaked man standing at the head of this group. Despite being surrounded by over 100 Tier 4 combatants and suppressed by a master magic array, this cloaked man remained incredibly calm. Guild leader Black Flame. You've really made me search for you. Awakened Abyss ignored everyone around him, focusing solely on Shifeng, the words he uttered carrying endless rage and killing intent. Although Awakened Abyss had eventually gotten rescued from Sky Spring City's prison, his reputation in the guild had still plummeted. As a result, despite being one of the guild's top 3 talents, he had no choice but to complete a bunch of meaningless missions, such as hunting down Shining Tiger's Tier 4 experts. Hence, Awakened Abyss bore deep hatred for Shifeng. Only, after the world passage opened, he had not obtained any information on Shifeng's whereabouts, so he had no opportunity to reclaim his honor. However, Shifeng ignored Awakened Abyss's anger and hatred entirely. Looking at the young man, Shifeng said calmly, "So, it's Commander Abyss of 100 Ghosts. It seems you've improved a lot since we last met." Awakened Abyss was evidently much stronger than when Shifeng saw him in Sky Spring City. The young man had not only reached level 145 but even broken through the 100% threshold of his mana body. His mana body's completion rate definitely rivaled Phythalia's. Most importantly, aside from sporting epic set equipment, Awakened Abyss also had 3 fragmented legendary items on him. Given that he was at the Domain Realm and had gotten far in the realms of truth, the combat power he could display was most likely superior to the average Tier 4 NPCs. "That's right. This is all thanks to you, Guild Leader Black Flame." Awakened Abyss gnashed his teeth at Shifeng's words. "Since we had the fortune of meeting today, how about we, 11?" Just as Awakened Abyss was about to propose a duel, Jade Leaf hurriedly tugged his sleeve and said quietly, "Abyss, don't mess around. His strength has already reached monstrous levels. Moreover, the Elder told you that now still isn't the time for us to make an enemy of Black Flame." Awakened Abyss had been imprisoned in Sky Spring City, so he had not witnessed the battle outside the Secret Covenant Tower. Back then, not only did Shifeng single-handedly slay hundreds of weakened Tier 4 foe Saint Saboteurs as if he was cutting up a bunch of vegetables, but he also revealed extraordinary trump cards. Shifeng also possessed an incredibly powerful mana domain. When he deployed his mana domain, none of the foe Saint Saboteurs managed to exhibit more than half of their usual combat power. While one of the reasons Wind Shadow had chosen to surrender to Zero Wing was indeed the mobile fortress's threat, a larger part was Shifeng's trump cards. Hence, he had chosen to surrender and compensate Zero Wing. Although their hunting group currently had a significant advantage in numbers and even had a master magic array suppressing Shifeng, Jade Leaf still couldn't see their group having any chance of victory against Shifeng's party. At Jade Leaf's reminder, Awakened Abyss gradually cooled down. "I know." Although Awakened Abyss wanted nothing more than to kill Shifeng right now, his circumstances were no longer the same as before. He could no longer afford to act willfully. Take Jade Leaf, for example. In addition to protecting him, she was also tasked with supervising him. If Awakened Abyss dared defy Wind Shadow's command and Jade Leaf reported his disobedience, it wouldn't matter whether he managed to kill Shifeng or not, nothing good would come of it. In fact, he might get even more marginalized in the guild. After Awakened Abyss finished his conversation with Jade Leaf, he turned to Quasi-Eagle. "Commander Eagle, remove the barrier. We're leaving." At Awakened Abyss's words, Quasi-Eagle and the other Tier 4 experts of the hunting party were all stunned. "What's going on?" 16th Cloud also goggled in shock. She couldn't understand why the situation had taken such an unexpected turn. While she wasn't aware of the history between Awakened Abyss and Shifeng, she could tell from the anger and hatred Awakened Abyss had displayed towards Shifeng a moment ago that Awakened Abyss wouldn't let them go. In fact, it was already incredible that Awakened Abyss did not take action immediately. Yet, Awakened Abyss was now saying to let them go. If not for her clearly sensing the resentment Awakened Abyss radiated, she would even suspect that Awakened Abyss had merely been feigning anger before and that he actually had an excellent relationship with Shifeng. Let alone 16th Cloud, even Shifeng found this situation surprising. He couldn't help wondering if Awakened Abyss had blown a fuse or two in his brain from his previous outburst and had a slip of the tongue. "Commander Abyss, what are you saying?" Looking at Awakened Abyss in confusion, Quasi-Eagle asked, "We've expended so much manpower and resources to hunt them down, yet you want us to just release them?" It wasn't easy to hunt down and surround the native superpowers Tier 4 experts, who were now operating very cautiously. If it were before, they would have required a team of only a dozen or so Tier 4 combatants to hunt down a handful of native Tier 4s. Now, They needed to mobilize over 100 Tier 4 combatants just for 3 of Shining Tiger's Tier 4 experts. Since their hunting group had surrounded 7 Tier 4 experts, for more than expected, they would make a fortune if they simply finished the job. Yet, Awakened Abyss was telling them to let these Tier 4 experts go. For a moment, Quasi-Eagle suspected that Awakened Abyss had gone crazy. In response, Awakened Abyss clenched his fists and repeated, "Yes, let them go." 16th Cloud and her 2 guildmates heaved a deep sigh of relief at Awakened Abyss's affirmation. Although they didn't know why such a situation was happening or who exactly Awakened Abyss was, Awakened Abyss appeared to be the leader of this hunting group. And since the leader had spoken, her party should be safe. However, contrary to the Shining Tiger trio's expectations, Quasi-Eagle, the mercenaries' leader, behaved as if he had not heard Awakened Abyss's command. He didn't call off his subordinates or remove the Master Magic Array. "Sorry, but I cannot listen to your words, Commander Abyss. I don't know what kind of relationship you have with this guild leader Black Flame, but I need to take care of my brothers. We went to great lengths to trap these people in a barrier. If we let them go now, my brothers will have nothing to eat." Looking at Awakened Abyss, Quasi-Eagle smiled faintly and said, "Since you are unwilling to take action, we will do it instead. If you can't bear to watch, you can shut your eyes and stand aside. I promise we won't let your friends suffer and will finish the battle quickly. I support you, boss. Commander Abyss, even if you're the leader, you have to ask our weapons first whether we agree with your commands." "That's right. Commander Abyss, if you can't bear to attack your friend, just stand aside." The other mercenaries promptly voiced their agreement with Quasi-Eagle. Players like them relied on bounties to make a living. Now that they had found themselves a big catch, there was no way they would let their prey get away. When Awakened Abyss heard these mercenaries' words, he had an urge to puke blood. When did I become friends with Black Flame?" Despite his anger at the mercenaries' comments, Awakened Abyss was actually delighted about this situation. In fact, he wished these mercenaries would blow up this situation even further. At that time, even if the higher-ups of his guild wanted to pin the blame on him, they couldn't. Although Awakened Abyss was slightly displeased that he wouldn't get revenge with his own hands, watching Shifeng get killed wasn't a bad option either. Jade Leaf, on the other hand, frowned at this sight. She never thought that these mercenaries would be so crazy. These mercenaries were treating a monster like Shifeng as an average Tier 4 expert under the command of the native superpowers. Instead of conducting detailed research on the man, the only thing they had in their minds was money. "Jade, you saw it yourself. I tried to let him go, but these people aren't willing to do so. There's nothing I can do about this." Pretending to be angry, Awakened Abyss said, "These mercenaries simply aren't treating me like their leader at all. That's why I've been saying that I'm not suited to leading these mercenaries. After this mission, you must talk to Elder Windshadow for me." "Forget it. We're leaving." Jade Leaf couldn't be bothered with these mercenaries. The instructions of the guild's higher-ups were simple: they were to avoid making an enemy out of Zero Wing, no matter what, for the moment. However, since they had no control over these mercenaries, the higher-ups naturally couldn't blame them for negligence if the mercenaries acted on their own. Jade Leaf promptly drew 100 Ghosts' members aside, refusing to participate in this affair. "Good." Seeing Jade Leaf moving away, Quasi-Eagle smiled and said, "Brothers, time to work. Make sure not to show too ugly of a scene to our dear Commander Abyss." The other mercenaries present laughed, all of them gazing at Shifeng's group with ill intentions. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU, friends, don't blame us for this. We're only doing this to make a living. For our sake, I'll have to trouble you to suffer a little bit. Quasi-Eagle said as he looked at Shifeng's group of 7, his eyes radiating killing intent. "Trouble?" Shifeng chuckled. "It seems you people have made a mistake." "Mistake?" Quasi-Eagle eyed Shifeng strangely. "What mistake?" "You've mistaken the roles of the hunter and the hunted in this situation. After saying so, Shifeng extended his mana domain, instantly enveloping a 2,000-yard radius in his mana and shattering the magic barrier trapping the seven. Chapter 2863, Peerless Overlord World Creation. How is this possible? 16th Cloud gaped in shock when she saw the magic barrier disappear and the pressure weighing down her body vanished. She simply couldn't bring herself to believe this situation. Even acquiring a mana domain was already tough for Tier 4 players. Anyone who managed to do so would become an absolute powerhouse among Tier 4 existences. Meanwhile, world creation was something even Tier 5 existences had difficulty achieving. Anyone who reached the world creation standard could create a small world of their own, which was much more powerful than a barrier created using a magic array. It was akin to a passive, large-scale magic barrier. What was even more amazing was that the owner of this small world could isolate enemies from the ambient mana. So long as the trapped enemies had yet to reach Tier 5 or the world creation standard or did not possess fragmented legendary items capable of countering a world creation mana domain, resisting the owner of the small world was impossible. In front of a world creation expert, Tier 4 experts were hardly any different from Tier 2 and Tier 3 players, they just had stronger basic attributes and physiques. Let alone 16th Cloud, even Awakened Abyss and Jade Leaf were stunned by this situation. How can he be at the world creation level already? Isn't he just a native? Awakened Abyss couldn't believe his eyes as he looked at Shifeng. Even in the gods' domain they came from, only experts standing at the apex of the world had reached the world creation standard, all of them old monsters belonging to the few transcendental powers. However, Shifeng's appearance indicated he was only 30, at most. Moreover, the god's domain he lived in was not only sparse in mana but also lacking in legacies. No matter how Awakened Abyss looked at it, there was no way anyone in this god's domain could achieve such strength at this stage of the game. So, this is his hidden strength? Jade Leaf was horrified by this revelation. Previously, when Wind Shadow told her that Shifeng was still hiding a lot of his strength and that they needed to be careful around him, she hadn't thought much of his warning. She had reminded Awakened Abyss to avoid clashing with Shifeng simply because she did not want to disobey Wind Shadow's orders. However, after Shifeng revealed his hidden strength, Jade Leaf found him much scarier than even Wind Shadow's predictions. The next moment, before Quasi-Eagle and the other mercenaries could snap out of their daze, Shifeng's Light of Two Worlds swung toward them. Tier 4 skill, Lightning Edge. Countless sword lights descended from the sky, creating a mesmerizing river of light. Quasi-Eagle and the other mercenaries indeed possessed combat power at the Tier 4 standard. Moreover, even the weakest Tier 3 expert among them was at the Refinement Realm standard. However, since they couldn't tap the ambient mana, none of the defensive maneuvers and life-saving skills they used could withstand Shifeng's attack. As a result, apart from Quasi-Eagle and a Tier 4 Elementalist, both of whom had broken through the 100% threshold of their mana bodies, everyone else lost their lives to the sword lights. When the River of Light disappeared, a ravine dozens of meters deep and nearly 1,000 meters long had formed in the forested region, with weapons and equipment strewn inside it. How is this possible? Quasi-Eagle, who had survived thanks to a Tier 4 defensive skill, was stupefied when he saw most of his team of more than 100 Tier 4 combatants wiped out. When he and the surviving elementalists looked at Shifeng again, they shuddered involuntarily, horror swamping their hearts. The two of them finally understood that what Shifeng had said earlier was true. From start to end, their team had merely been a bunch of clowns. They arrogantly thought of Shifeng's group as sheep for the slaughter, not knowing that they themselves were the actual sheep. World creation. No wonder Awakened Abyss conceded without hesitation. Quasi-Eagle smiled bitterly as he looked at Shifeng. The loss of levels was a small matter for Tier 4 players like them. However, the loss of weapons and equipment wasn't something that they could recover from easily. Boss, what should we do? The level 144, Tier 4 male elementalist asked Quasi-Eagle in a panic. There's no way we can get away from him inside this small world. We also can't fly inside the Demon Mist Valley. Once a world creation expert unleashed their mana domain, escape was impossible, especially for players like themselves. At the elementalist's question, Quasi-Eagle gritted his teeth and said to Shifeng, "Friend, my brother and I surrender. We are willing to compensate you with 2 pieces of top-tier epic equipment for each of us. What do you think?" Quasi-Eagle's proposal surprised Awakened Abyss and the other 100 Ghosts members. The commander of the Wild Hunt mercenary group was considered above average among the Tier 4 experts in their god's domain. For him to actually bow down to another was simply unbelievable. Quasi-Eagle was known to be a ruthless person in their god's domain. He had once gone up against a guild all by himself. Despite getting killed more than a dozen times, he still did not give up clashing with the guild. Eventually, the guild in question suffered a major loss in a guild war. And with Quasi-Eagle incessantly targeting the guild's experts, the guild had no choice but to concede and provide all sorts of compensation to Quasi-Eagle to put this feud to rest. This incident had spurred Quasi-Eagle's rise to fame. He had then gone on to establish the present Wild Hunt mercenary group, which had a reputation as a pack of mad dogs in their god's domain. Yet, Quasi-Eagle was actually taking the initiative to admit defeat after suffering such a small setback. How could Awakened Abyss and the others not find this situation surprising? Unfortunately, Shifeng showed no interest whatsoever in Quasi-Eagle's proposal. 3 pieces. We'll pay 3 pieces of epic equipment each. Quasi-Eagle said, gritting his teeth. Even if you kill us, the most we will drop is 2 items each. Top-tier epic equipment is rare even in the present god's domain. This is definitely a worthwhile transaction for you. Normally, Quasi-Eagle wouldn't have minded getting killed. However, he currently had a precious treasure on his person, and it had a certain chance of dropping upon death. It was precisely thanks to this treasure that he had managed to break through his mana body's 100% threshold. Meanwhile, this was only the tip of the iceberg of what this treasure had to offer. Although he didn't know what exactly this treasure was, since it had such an ability, it was definitely more valuable than even fragmented legendary items. He naturally wouldn't dare bet on the chance that it wouldn't drop. Hence, he endured the humiliation of surrendering. However, before Quasi-Eagle could finish speaking, Shifeng had already slashed out with the Abyssal blade. First sword, Light Shadow. You lunatic. When Quasi-Eagle and the elementalists saw the towering greatsword descending toward them, they promptly activated another life-saving skill. The 2 of them then fled in different directions, neither daring to receive the descending greatsword. They could clearly sense the frightening power the illusory greatsword carried. This attack was most likely much stronger than even that of superior mythic monsters. Receiving it would be suicide. 1 slash. 2 slashes. 3 slashes. As Quasi-Eagle and the Tier 4 Elementalist used up one life-saving skill after another, Shifeng executed Light Shadow time and again. After 5 consecutive slashes, Quasi-Eagle and the Elementalist finally fell to the illusory greatsword and transformed into ashes, each of them dropping 2 items as they died. This scene rendered Awakened Abyss and Jade Leaf speechless for a long time. So, this is the power of world creation. 16th Cloud similarly found herself at a loss for words when she saw Quasi-Eagle getting killed in just a few moves. Read latest chapters at Wuxia EU. Her party of 3 had previously clashed with the mercenary commander. Despite the 3 of them working together to fight him, they were still at a disadvantage. Yet, Shifeng had overwhelmed Quasi-Eagle and another Tier 4 expert, who had also broken through the 100% threshold of his mana body, so much that the 2 couldn't even retaliate. Afterward, Shifeng collected the loot from Wild Hunt, then glanced at 100 Ghosts' group. Awakened Abyss and the dozen or so Tier 4 experts around him shuddered involuntarily. A few of them even stumbled 2 steps back. Shifeng turned to 16th Cloud and the others. Let's go. Leaving behind the petrified members of 100 Ghosts, Shifeng led 16th Cloud and the others straight out of the Demon Mist Valley. Chapter 2864, Astonishing Zero Wing, He's Finally Gone. Jade Leaf heaved a deep sigh of relief when Shifeng's group disappeared into the distance. Previously, she thought that Shifeng would take action against them. Although they weren't afraid of getting killed, losing equipment would still impact them to a certain extent. Black flame. Awakened Abyss glared at the distant sky. Just you wait. I'll get back at you one day. Although Shifeng was indeed powerful, he wasn't an invincible existence. This was especially true in the War of Worlds. Let alone Tier 4 world creation experts, even Tier 5 NPCs were incapable of stopping their invasion. Otherwise, so many kingdoms on the eastern continent wouldn't have fallen so soon after the War of Worlds began. Now, while it might seem like both sides had reached a balance, they were merely accumulating their strength. Moreover, it wouldn't be long before the next large-scale operation began. Abyss, you'd better not mess around. Black Flame is much scarier than we initially expected. If you disrupt the Alliance's plans, even Elder Windshadow won't be able to protect you, Jade Leaf warned. What we need to do now is notify the Elder about Black Flame as soon as possible. Although a peerless overlord like Shifeng couldn't affect the overall situation of the war between the two gods' domains, he could still affect the outcome of some war theaters. I know. Awakened Abyss nodded. After this operation, I'll return to headquarters and apply for a trial slot. You'll apply for the trial now? Isn't it too soon? Jade Leaf asked in surprise. The god's domain they came from was different from this god's domain. Their world had plenty of legacies. One of the more valuable legacies 100 Ghosts possessed was an ancient trial, and the entry slots for this trial were generally reserved for the guild's top talents. However, while this ancient trial could provide significant growth to players, it also came with significant risks. Failure would put players' souls into a weakened state for a long period. Moreover, every top talent in the guild had only one opportunity to challenge this trial. If I can improve my strength now, I can earn more contribution points in the upcoming war. So long as I accumulate enough points, I can just exchange for another trial slot. Awakened Abyss had long considered challenging the ancient trial. The Interstellar Alliance was adamant in acquiring the Eastern Continent, hence, it had offered incredibly lavish rewards to those willing to contribute to this cause. With his status as one of 100 Ghosts' peerless geniuses, acquiring another slot for future use wouldn't be difficult so long as he made enough contributions in the war. His only problem was that he needed to achieve world creation in this trial. Previously, Awakened Abyss had only heard rumors regarding the strength of world creation, but he hadn't known exactly how powerful the ability to create a small world was. However, after seeing Shifeng's battle, he finally understood the power of world creation. This was why he had decided to challenge the trial ahead of time. Arctic Canyon, Zero Wing City. Several bright flashes appeared above the teleportation array inside Zero Wing City's teleportation hall as Shifeng's party of 7 teleported into the city. So, this is Zero Wing City. 16th Cloud was astonished when she arrived inside the teleportation hall. What incredibly dense mana. Although she had long since heard rumors that Zero Wing City's mana was extraordinary, she found that the city was even more amazing than the rumors had depicted it to be. Zero Wing City was bustling with people. All sorts of NPC merchants and NPC nobles were walking down the street outside the teleportation hall. She spotted even Tier 4 NPCs wandering the city. If not for her coming to Zero Wing City to sign a partnership contract with Zero Wing on behalf of Shining Tiger, she would have never realized that Zero Wing City was such an amazing place. Phythalia, McCaffrey, and Crimson which were also shocked by the city. Not only did Zero Wing City possess superior mana to the Starlight Fortresses, but its security standard was also incredible. There were even Tier 4 NPCs patrolling the city. Zero Wing City's security standard was something no other guild city in God's domain could even imagine having. While the various superpowers boasted Tier 4 NPCs of their own, these NPCs were personal guards the various superpowers nurtured. The superpowers treated every one of these NPCs as their most precious combatants, normally using them to defend entire towns or cities single-handedly. However, in Zero Wing City, Tier 4 NPCs were actually tasked with leading patrol squads. Moreover, there wasn't just one such patrol squad patrolling the city streets but many. The Tier 4 NPCs that were precious in the eyes of the various superpowers were no different from cabbages in Zero Wing City. Shifeng, though, did not find this situation particularly surprising. Zero Wing City was currently the only main guild city in God's domain. It was even situated in the Arctic Canyon, a high-level neutral map. The number of Tier 4 NPCs seeking to develop themselves here would naturally be significant. Hence, Zero Wing City could recruit a group of Tier 4 NPCs to serve as soldiers. Not to mention, Zero Wing City's mana environment rivaled that of the ancient god's domain, making the city even more attractive to Tier 4 NPCs. After all, if one wished to develop themselves further, one would need to improve one's understanding of mana. However, Shifeng had to admit that Zero Wing City had truly made significant progress while he was gone. Not only had the strength of the city's NPC soldiers improved, but even the players occupying the city had grown stronger. Now, the players here were all Tier 3 or above, with even the lowest leveled among them at level 136. He had even noticed quite a few Tier 4 players in the city. On the way from the teleportation hall to Zero Wing's residence, Shifeng had spotted more than 10 Tier 4 players, which meant that Zero Wing City was even more prosperous than the Starlight Fortress. After all, any player capable of entering Zero Wing City now was a member of either Zero Wing or one of the guild's partners, and this drastically reduced the number of players capable of entering the city. Apart from that, the number of Zero Wing's members present in the city had reached an incredible number. When Zero Wing City was first opened after its promotion to main city, only several tens of thousands of Zero Wing members had entered it. Yet, according to the information Shifeng received from the guild residents, there were more than 500,000 Zero Wing members in the city now. Given that one needed to be at least Tier 3 to operate around Zero Wing City, Zero Wing currently had at least 500,000 Tier 3 players under its command. This number definitely surpassed that of ordinary superpowers by a large margin and rivaled what super guilds had. Guild leader, this is our guild's latest development report, Liang Jing said with a hint of pride as she handed Shifeng a statistics report. Although a lot of things had occurred on the eastern continent during Shifeng's absence, because of the mobile fortress and 3 guild cities, Zero Wing managed to hurdle most of these problems. In fact, during the War of Worlds, Zero Wing City had practically become a shelter that all players sought to enter. Many annihilated guilds and wandering adventurer teams had chosen to join Zero Wing, which resulted in Zero Wing's member count skyrocketing. If not for resource limitations, the guild's member count would have most likely doubled by EBA now. /B amazing. Shifeng was astounded when he read the numbers on the report. At present, Zero Wing's total Tier 3 member count already exceeded 800,000, more than 500,000 of which were operating in Zero Wing City. The rest were operating in Stone Forest City, Silverwing City, and the Mobile Fortress. However, this still wasn't the most astonishing part. What was more important was that Zero Wing now had 73 Tier 4 players under its command. This number was even higher than what the average super guild had. For a moment, Shifeng even wondered if he had returned to the wrong guild. After all, super first-rate guilds currently had only a dozen or so Tier 4 players, with stronger ones having 20. Super guilds had only around 30 or 40. Only existences like the 5 great super guilds had over 70 Tier 4 experts. Moreover, according to Liang Jing's report, Zero Wing still had over 40 players stuck inside their respective Tier 4 legacy lands, and half of them were expected to succeed in their promotion. In other words, Zero Wing would soon have over 100 Tier 4 experts under its command. Of course, the main reason Zero Wing could produce such frightening numbers was Zero Wing City's environment. The environment here allowed players to continuously improve their knowledge of and control over mana. Looking at Shifeng's surprised expression, Liang Jing suggested, Guild leader, several more Outer World superpowers arrived on the Eastern Continent recently, and some of the Eastern Continent's superpowers got annihilated as a consequence. I think we should absorb the Tier 3 and Tier 4 players of these fallen superpowers. Since our income of resources has reached a bottleneck, and we can support only so many guild members with what we currently have, I wish to open Zero Wing City further. With the city's advantages, we can easily acquire even more resources. Then, we can recruit more experts into Zero Wing. Shifeng nodded in agreement with Liang Jing's suggestion. The War of Worlds was indeed a scary event, but it was also a good opportunity for development. This was because the moment the world passage opened, the players of the two gods' domains were enemies. Not only were players from the two gods' domains incapable of adding each other as friends, but they couldn't communicate with each other through the system either. Read latest chapters at World. EU. In addition, players of the two worlds could kill each other without accumulating any crime value. In fact, native players would even receive gifts and EXP from killing Outer World players, albeit significantly lower EXP than the EXP awarded for killing monsters and NPCs. Most importantly, native players couldn't join Outer World guilds and vice versa. Hence, native forces were the only option available to members of fallen superpowers. We should indeed open Zero Wing City further to the public. Smiling, Shifeng added, before that, though, we still need to do something. We still need to do something? Liang Jing parroted in confusion. In her opinion, Zero Wing had already done everything possible and reached its current development limit. To expand its forces further, the only option it had was to open up Zero Wing City. As for Zero Wing's other territories, developing them any further was impossible at present. That's right. Nodding, Shifeng took out a document and said, prepare the materials on this list for me. I need them immediately. Further opening Zero Wing City to the public was a must. However, before doing so, he needed to complete the Intercontinental Teleportation Array. With it, the city's opening would generate much better results.